Well, in space, they may not be able to hear you scream, but in my living room, you can see me curl up under the blanket. Um, Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Cinematic Realms. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the new FX series, Alien Earth. How are you doing, Jared? Thoroughly freaked out?
One of the taglines of this show played off that famous tagline of "In space, no one can hear you scream," and it just says, "We were safer in space." So there is no place to hide.
One thing that I want to say right off the top, and I unfortunately don't have a picture of it. It's one of the freakiest images in the show, but that's okay. I have other ones. I just want to say, for those of us who are here for our stream on the witch, I think this sheep is related to Philip the goat. Because it absolutely gave me similar vibes.
Well, they are both possessed by an otherworldly force. It's just that one of them is supernatural and one of them is some kind of mind-controlling squid, octopus, eye-ripping thing that is somehow manages to be scarier than the actual tentacled alien that is the show its name.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. That strangely enough, the actual creature on its own did not freak me out as much as when it went into the sheep and was just staring at everybody.
Yeah.
That I think that's going to show up in my nightmares.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's a well-worn trope that, one of the things that we as people are naturally squeamish about are eyes, and anything related to eye-related violence is going to have a little bit extra, ooh. But they managed to take that and then dial it up, not even just to 11, I might say to 15.
Yeah, and also creepy animals.
Yeah.
That also is really so scary, because especially animals that are normally furry and cute. and then you just turn it into something hellish. And and it just it makes the skin crawl. So yeah. And there's plenty of that to go around in this series, but also a lot that is thought-provoking, as is usually the case in this franchise. So we'll just dive into it and start talking about it. Based on our conversations, I'm gonna guess that your overall feelings about the show so far are on the positive side.
Yeah, it's just a delight to have this show in our lives for the past couple of weeks. And, obviously delight is kind of a loaded word because this show is very dark and deals with very heavy themes. But we both are big fans of the Alien universe. And I think that this show has definitely, even only halfway through its first season, staked its claim as a show that belongs in that universe and deserves to be, held as a worthy companion piece to many of the classic movies in this franchise. And I have one of the things I have to acknowledge is that even though I knew that there was going to be a TV show set in the Alien universe, and that I knew that series was going to be created and showrun by Noah Hawley, who has an excellent track record with shows like Fargo and Legion, I have to admit I was kind of sleeping on this show because I think I was a little bit more focused on other things like Andor and The Last of Us and some other shows that were coming down the pike this year. And so I'm kind of like, and yeah, there will be that Alien show, and we'll see if it's any good. And then we got the first trailer, and I'm like, oh yes, this is the good shit. The show has definitely lived up to that.
Yeah. I was on the opposite track, which is where this was announced. and it was announced that it was going to be created by Noah Hawley, and just, and I haven't even seen. I know I've said before, most people know him from doing Fargo. I actually have never seen Fargo, but what I have seen is Legion, and just based off of my experience of watching that show, I was like, oh Jesus, fuck, this is going to be incredible. And I have been like, and it infuriated me to no end that it took forever for them to release any footage from the show. Like, it seems like we went forever not seeing anything, and then they started dropping these little teases that were just like quick little promotional things that still didn't really show anything from the show itself. And I'm like, God damn it, I just want to see something from this show. And when we finally got the teaser, the proper teasers and trailers, I was like, yes, inject this into my veins. So like, this has been something I've been like just itching for a while now. It feels like I was anticipating this for like a year beforehand, however long it was when they announced it. And it's funny because actually at first, when, after the sale to Disney happened, from Fox to Disney, and they announced that they wanted to do an Alien project, I sort of, jokingly, I'm sure like everybody else was like, Disney doing Alien, yeah, that's gonna turn out good. but again, as soon as they announced who was actually going to be making the show, I was like, okay, all previous cynicism gone. It's going to be freaking out of this world incredible. And I have been very pleased with what we've had so far. But I'm even as we're talking about these episodes, I'm on the edge of my seat for this Tuesday's episode because of the description that I read of it. And I'm like, oh God, it's probably a good thing that we haven't had that episode yet, because I feel like that might have, not really, but it might have ended up dominating the whole conversation, because it feels like, if the show was going to have anything that's would be described as fan service, I feel like it's going to be next week's episode, because it feels like it's poised to give us all that, really great alien goodness from like the classic 1979 film, which we get a taste of early on in these episodes. But needless to say, I have freaking loved this, and it's been great, just from the themes the show is exploring to the actors involved and the world building. It's everything I could have hoped for.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons that you mentioned you were like waiting and waiting and waiting for the them to show us anything from the show. I think that was one of the things that kind of contributed to my hype being a little bit, muted up until that first trailer, was just because there's only so much excitement you can drum up from like the ubiquitous graphic of like the earth cracking like the alien egg that was everywhere. And one of the things was, as you said, the idea that like, they're going to do an Alien TV show. Can Alien work on TV? And that seems a little bit like less of a big challenge right now, given the fact that we have now, there used to be, can Star Wars work on TV? Yes. Can Lord of the Rings work on TV? Yes, if you ask us. Can you do, can big epic fantasy work on TV? Going all the way back to Game of Thrones. And then obviously major shows like The Last of Us and things like that. So, like, yes, this is a series that, in theory, could work. But in order for it to work, you have to commit to the immersion of putting us in that world and give it the budget and the creative, thought to make it a worthy part of that world. And this show is not cheap. They filmed it, on location in Thailand, and it has a big cast, and there are a ton of visual effects. And it would be understandable to think, well, if they're going to do Alien on TV, that is going to have to be a little bit smaller. And to be fair, the first Alien movie, even though it is an iconic classic, is actually a much more intimate setting than you would think. And I thought maybe that would be the vibe. But this show is so much bigger than that. This show just feels like epic. It feels like it has unlocked the entire world of Alien, going along with the title there. And I also think that it is a show that as you said, can Disney do Alien? Well, so far they've given us Alien Romulus and this show, so I would say they're doing pretty damn well on that front. Yeah. Disney princesses, this is not. Although I would be okay if they wanted to make Wendy a Disney princess. that would be kind of fun. But
there's already the Disney connection with Peter Pan.
With Peter Pan, which there is a nice bit of corporate synergy there, and although there is also a more surprising connection, because I have to admit, I was not expecting this movie's one of the most pivotal emotional relationships to hinge on Ice Age continental drift. Which I haven't seen, by the way.
Yeah, neither have I. So, I got it, but the nostalgia of that moment was perhaps a little lost on me.
But it works. It works. Yeah, and I just think that what we have seen is that, they've talked a lot about the fact that the streaming bubble is bursting, and perhaps we aren't going to get quite as many of these big epic TV shows anymore. But it's worth noting that this is actually not a streaming show, although it does air on Hulu and Disney Plus. It's an FX show. So this is actually something of a throwback. And I think that this is an example of, if you are going to take a big swing with a beloved franchise property, and update it with a television show kind of set in that world, this is how you do it. This has so far been a textbook example of how to do something like this respectfully and in a way that just makes me feel like the possibilities are wide open.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. FX shows like this are like this and Shogun, are technically they're FX shows, but they air once on FX and then never again. And then they're on Hulu. So it's a kind of a gray area, as to what exactly they are. But yeah, I'll be interested to see what kind of run this show has. Because just going by other Noah Hawley shows, different beasts, because I'm sure none of them cost as much as this has. But I know Fargo has been pretty long running now. That's an anthology series. Legion went for 3 seasons, which I think was pretty good for what it was, just because of how high concept and out there it was. And I could see something similar for this show, just depending on what they're willing to, how much money they're willing to throw at it, and how successful it is. But I none of that matters right now. I'm just enjoying the story that's before us in the moment. But I'm glad we're getting something like this, because this feels like a pure vision from Noah Hawley, something that's, for all, people cry, sort of cookie cutter corporate stuff from Disney and Marvel and Lucasfilm. It's but you look at something like this and you cannot possibly consider this anything other than Noah Hawley drawing the stuff from his fucked up brain and like putting it onto the screen. And that's why I was so excited about the project, because that's what he does, and he does it brilliantly. And so I'm just excited to see something like this with this universe, which doesn't. It's funny because we had conversations about like, because he's given interviews about what this is connected to, what it's not connected to, and even though there, for my money so far, there's nothing explicit that like, you know, sort of counteracts anything in say Ridley Scott's later Alien films. It does feel like a wholly unique vision that is sort of birthed from the imagination leaping off of the original Alien film, and I just sort of love that. It feels like it's allowed to be its own unique thing, and it's just, yeah, it's batshit crazy, and emotional, and just thought provoking and freaky, and yeah.
You know, we had talked about the fact that like Noah Hawley had been open in the pre lead up to the show, the idea that he was going to be drawing inspiration much more from the first two films in the franchise, Alien and Aliens, and you know, because those were the movies that he grew up with and had the closest emotional connection to. And I think that, you know, maybe the wider discourse got a little bit carried away with the fact that, you know, he wasn't going to be paying quite as much homage to some of the other films, specifically the prequel films of Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And I think that may have been a little bit overstated, just because you know, there are articles out there basically saying this proves that like this doesn't line up with those movies. And I'm like, well, yeah, I think that if you want to go back and parse the timeline, you can probably say that this show, if you are operating under what Prometheus and Alien Covenant seem to be establishing, that the android David was the creator of the xenomorphs, I kind of think that the show is not really going with that. But it's not outright refuting it. There's nothing explicit on that scene. It's just more of the idea that like if the Maginot left on this vessel for a 65-year mission, then that timeline doesn't track. And then I'm like, you know what? I don't really care, you know, because I think that at this point, it's clear that, you know, if the show, you know, this takes place 2 years before the first Alien movie, and I actually think that it is going to tie into that one pretty directly. But for now, it's like, if you are going to tell a show this expansive, you have to give the creator room to kind of make it their own. And I think that's what Noah Hawley is doing here.
Yeah, and we could have discussions about the whole Prometheus Alien Covenant thing. I actually think that there's contradiction within those two films. I actually think that Prometheus establishes that the xenomorphs did exist already, at least in some form, and so that doesn't really line up with Alien Covenant. But like, we could do this all day. For me, it's like, are you telling a great story? And this series absolutely is. And I will say that I think the conception of the alien creature in this show falls most in line with that original film, because this is a highly intelligent creature. Whereas I feel like even starting with Aliens, they started to behave a bit more like sort of, James Cameron went with the whole, sort of insect parallel, and all at the command of like the alien queen, and they didn't seem like, once they started making like multiple xenomorphs a threat, then it became like they're like this overwhelming force that just keeps coming at you. Whereas I feel like that original conception of the alien creature was just that one alone was like something that you had to be absolutely terrified about, because as much as it was like vicious and and powerful, it was also like it could outsmart you, and like that feels very much in line with what they're doing with it here in this story. And so I kind of like taking the creature back to those roots, and the fact that it's not really specified like how like old this this race or weapon, what have you, is. And I'm fine with that, because I think that's again, that fires the sort of imagination that I have when I'm watching the original Alien, of the unknown things. And so I think that's a lot of fun to play with. And plus, we've got a slew of other creatures as well in this, two of which have already, freaked me out. And then I'm really, really equally freaked out by the fact that we don't quite know what the other two do yet. So, yeah. But enough about like, and all that. Should we talk about the actual story?
Let's do it.
I just want to say, like, again, I alluded to it earlier, but before we talk about like our core characters, the show starts off with the Maginot, which is extremely reminiscent of the Nostromo, and the film opens up with very similar imagery. The cryopods, the crew eating around the dinner table, and the robotic / cybernetic, beings doing things that are, shall we say, underhanded and untrustworthy. I'm really excited that it looks like we're going to get to see more of that story in the next episodes, because I thought that those little hints were all we were getting, but it looks like not. It's like we're going to get more. But I really like the show starting off this way, because it was just like, it just made my spine tingle, just because it took me back to that original film, which, is, the birth of my love for this whole franchise. I just remember seeing that film for the first time, and like, there's just like, the ship itself is creepy. So, so I like them revisiting that imagery and stuff. And yeah, so it's, yeah. And that's when we get our first introduction to, is the character's name is Morrow, right?
Yeah.
I believe.
More is be revealed in this most recent episode, but mostly he goes by his last name, Morrow.
Yeah.
He is a cyborg, which is a type of being that I actually don't think we've seen to this extent in the Alien franchise before. And that's actually one of the things that, and we will circle back to this. But this series opens with basically like an opening crawl of sorts that helps set the stage, and the idea that there are multiple different kinds of artificial people in this world, or people who have been enhanced in some way. And Morrow kind of serves as our window into one of those types, the cyborg, a human who has been received enhancements, but is still human at the core, with all that means, good and bad. And then we have our traditional synthetics, probably in this case most directly embodied by Timothy Olyphant's character Kirsch. And there have been a lot of very famous synths in this series. Some who have proven to be not so trustworthy, and a few who have. And then they split the difference. And then we obviously have the new creation for the show, which is the hybrids, which are the humans, the human children whose consciousness has been transported into a synthetic body. And that is our core characters of the Lost Boys, and specifically our lead character of Wendy, formerly Marcy, played by Sydney Chandler, who is awesome, and we will get to that shortly. But yes, I really like that they did that to start the series, because it sets the stakes. The idea that this is not just about the alien creatures of what the hell is going to happen when it gets unleashed on Earth, as the title promises. It is a show about something bigger. It is a show that is about what many would consider, the core question of most science fiction storytelling, like what does it mean actually to be human? And when humans try to cheat death, to transcend death, how far are they willing to go to do that? And if they do, are they truly human anymore? And I think that is just an awesome premise for a show. In addition to all the classic vibes.
Yeah, in a way, this sort of, obviously the films have tackled, these notions of, synthetic life forms, but and through that they've, examined the idea of, what makes them different from human and how are they similar. But this show really takes it on in a way that felt like the melding almost of, taking Blade Runner and, and injecting those themes into this show, but in a different way, sort of, just because the idea of these companies and these like three different life forms. And yeah, that's very fitting, just, since all this comes from Ridley Scott. But yeah, I thought that was great. And was really fun about it was that by doing that, it gives us our first really big look at, the show is called Alien Earth. So we're actually examining Earth and the companies that basically rule Earth, for lack of a better term. As we find out that, people used to vote for people they wanted in power, but that didn't work. Shocker.
There's so much in that one line.
and then, and thank God these corporations stepped in, right? Wow, they really saved us, huh?
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. And and so and that's fascinating, just because the show is also, it's examining all these futuristic themes, but also it is so directly talking about our present day real world as well. By tackling that. But yeah, so it was really fun just to get a look at like the Earth behind the scenes of all of these movies that we've seen, that I don't think, like, we've obviously, in Ridley Scott's prequel films, we get a closer up view of Peter Wayland and sort of that perspective on the corporate, the capital C corporation, that's alluded to most often, Weyland-Yutani. But I don't feel like we've ever gotten something like this, where it's really showing us how the world operates, in this universe, unless they tackled that in like one of the like Alien Predator films that I haven't seen. So I wouldn't know about any of that, but I feel like this has to be like the most clear-eyed view we've gotten of all of that. And I just found that really interesting, especially, it was kind of a thrill that we finally meet at least one of the Yutanis in this series, and of course we get to meet the most mature, just wonderful human being in Boy Cavalier.
Peter Pan himself, as
Yeah.
as he know that deludedly believes.
Yeah. So immediately, like, it's a different vantage point for exploring this universe, and I thought that was really great, because we get the sort of, if you want to call it fan service of getting a lot of stuff on, like, a Whalen Yutani ship with the aliens and all that stuff, but so much of this story takes place outside of that usual environment, actually on Earth, and I just thought it was a wonderful new way to tell a story in this universe.
No, I mean this show kind of recontextualizes what we know about the alien universe, in this, and specifically in terms of the power structure of Earth. Because in most alien movies, Earth is kind of a more distant concept. We only go there very briefly in movies like Prometheus and Alien Resurrection. So it was almost kind of a blank canvas. And I think one of the big, swings that this show is taking is that, for the longest time in our estimation, it was, as you said, the company, one company, Whalen Yutani, which I think we kind of, obviously they are kind of the villains of the series, along with the titular xenomorph. And it kind of seemed like they were a little bit more of a monopoly that kind of just had control over pretty much everything, or at least space travel. And this show makes it clear that there are actually 5 companies: Whalen Yutani, Threshold, Lynch, Dynamic, and our new most prominent one, where we actually are spending most of our time, Prodigy, headed by Boy Cavalier. And I actually think that was very smart of them to essentially ground our characters in a new company and a new position, and allow the Whalen Yutani, characters and the characters affiliated with them, like Moro, to kind of be a little bit more, not off to the side, because they're very much a part of the story, but have them be a little bit more of like the black box while we still go into this new company, and we get to see that they are motivated, by the same things, greed and power, but ultimately at its core, Prodigy is a company that is trying to do something that is that has never been done before, with the creation of these synths, and they're doing, or these hybrids, and they are doing it as a way to try to allow humans to transcend their mortal existence. And we get the sense that Whalen Yutani seems to be following what they always were following, which is these, like, they want these creatures, they want the aliens. Yutani, the one who seems to be heading the company at this moment. It's unclear if Peter Whalen's probably long gone at this point. She considers these creatures to be her birthright, in an interesting way. But with Prodigy, we essentially have a blank slate, even though we know at its core, the moment we lay eyes on Boy Cavalier, we're like, oh, this fucking guy does not have. Maybe we just leave it at that. This fucking.
He only has to step on screen and utter one word, and yeah, the response is this fucking guy.
Which again, the actor Samuel Blenkin, he's doing an awesome
brilliant
performance. He's so good. He's so good.
It's just like, you want to throttle him.
Yeah, but I think that it helps that I think it's because we, as the audience in the Alien franchise, we are conditioned, as we are increasingly are in the real world, to think big monopolistic corporation equals bad and evil. But the character of Wendy, who is our lead character, she is a character who doesn't know that. She's a child, and this company, saves her life. And so she is, she is grateful for that, but she also is kind of, still learning about the world as she goes. And I think that allows her to kind of see, put us into her perspective of kind of seeing things with the fresh eyes, because we know that she should not trust Boyd Cavalier, and she probably shouldn't trust Kirsch and Dame Sylvia, even though they are, more friendly towards her.
I
But
love the image of them as like co-parents.
Yeah, they're yeah.
In that opening scene with them and sorry, I'm already and Wendy, when they're sitting in front of her and like, and she's like, we want you to explore your humanity, and he's over here like, what are you even talking about? She's not human anymore. Stop treating her. It's like, Kirsch, have you missed the point of this whole enterprise?
I and we'll get into that a little bit more. But Kirsch, even though he was also created by humans, he doesn't seem to have a very high opinion of them, and seems definitely to believe that synthetics are the superior, beings, because they are not part of the food chain, as he would say.
I'm having a fun time imagining what Kirsch would think of Raylan Givens.
Oh, I'm actually more interested to think of what Raylan Givens would think of Kirsch. I'm sure he would have a few choice comments to make. Now I desperately want to see that. But in particular, the reason I bring all that up is because, Wendy, as she is learning about her new body and her new capabilities and her place in the world, in that scene, she asks the essential question: if I'm not human anymore, what am I? And Kirsch's even though Kirsch, obviously, as we were joking, kind of has his opinions on the matter, he does tell her in that scene, whatever you want to be. And that ultimately, I think, is the driving force of this season. Who is Wendy, and what is how much of her humanity is still present? Has it changed? And who does she want to be? Because we know a few things about her. We know, for instance, that she has this connection to her brother, Joe, or Hermit, played by the wonderful Alex Lawther, who she clearly adores, that she loves him very much. She wants to protect him. She wants to be with him. But she has a connection to these other beings who are like her, these other children, the Lost Boys. But she also, as we are now learning to see, has another connection. She has a connection to the creature we were taught to think of as the monster, the alien itself. And I have a feeling that connection is going to be ultimately what tilts her question of who she wants to be.
Yeah, I'm like, these episodes end on a very tantalizing note that has me like, and that's the only thing that has me infuriated about next week, is I'm actually concerned that we may not get back to this moment until the week after next. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? What does it mean? And yeah, but yeah, we'll get to that. But yeah, and it should also be said, because we haven't really sort of delved into this part yet, but I think one of the most interesting things that this show does with Wendy as a protagonist that differentiates her from from other protagonists in this franchise is that even though she looks like an adult, she is a child, as are the other hybrids, because at this stage in the experimenting on this, it's only children's minds can actually handle the transition into the synth bodies. And so that is like just so incredibly interesting from a sort of perspective of, you know, having this heroine, you know, for the story, just because there's just so many times that her and the other hybrids just react as children would, and it's at odds with the fact that they look like grown adults. And it's often, you know, both interesting and also really entertaining. And I feel like that immediately differentiates her from like Ripley or any of the other characters. And I especially love like when some of the other hybrids, like, you know, the whole sequence, you know, that takes place over a couple episodes of them on the Weyland-Yutani ship, and they're just like seeing stuff that might really freak out and disturb adults, but they're like, no way, man, I can't, are you seeing this?
With one notable exception, one of the hybrids who we'll get to seems to be having the appropriate response, which is, what the fuck is this? Get me out of here.
And yeah, and we're gonna talk about her because there's a lot going on with her. But yeah, it's just, but even like in her case, and we're talking about the character of Nibs right now, that's just so interesting because and you get the feeling, like watching the earlier episodes, that she's already undergoing some trauma from, you know, is it from the transition itself, or is it from something in her past, you know, in her life prior to being a hybrid. But she seems like even before the incident on, you know, on the ship, she seems like in desperate need of comfort and like just, you know, taken care of and and therapy, honestly. and then you put her in that situation, and yeah, it's a disaster mentally for her, and she has the appropriate like post-traumatic stress response that you would expect from a normal adult in that situation, but also definitely from somebody who's just is wanting to steer away from any kind of you know, sense of a lack of security and the lack of safety. And I'm really interested to dive more into her character as we go throughout the rest of the season, because part of me is like, I want her to be okay, but I get the feeling that she is not.
No,
No.
that she is. The question is just how ultimately will it turn out for her? Because as we have, I know her pregnancy isn't real, but as we have joked, you do not want to be pregnant in the alien universe, and the fact that that's where her mind is going, as makes me go like, oh, this is not good. But yeah, one of I actually think it's because we have 6 of these hybrid characters, and they've gotten various degrees of characterization. We have spent more time with some of them than others, but I actually think it's interesting that we're seeing 3 separate tracks of how they are adjusting to this new life. 2 of the characters, the character of Curly, who you see in the middle here, played by Arana James, and the character of Toodles, or should I call him Isaac, because he would prefer to be called, played by Kit Young. They seem to be embracing the idea that we are now in these adult bodies. We're not kids anymore. We're adults. We can handle it, and we should be doing more adult things. And it's notable that they are the characters who are, for instance, assisting Kirsch with his experiments. And Toodles, or Isaac, seems to be very like optimistic and boyish about, you know, his enthusiasm for learning and all the scientific process, whereas the character of Curly seems to be much more driven to prove herself. And as she later says to the character of Boy Cavalier, like, why do you think Wendy's the best? I'm the best. You should be favoring me. And so they're the more
as dickish as Boy is, especially in that moment. Boy, does he burn her.
Oh, he does. Oh, he does. I mean, and that is a classic, you know, kind of psychological abuse that these types of characters are, you know, prone to dish out.
Yeah, you can speak French, but can you do that?
Yeah. And she tries to, and he's like, don't tell me what I want to hear, tell me the truth, which actually is, you know, good advice. And then on the opposite side, we have the two characters of Nibs and Smee, who seem to very much still be regressing into their, like, in Nib's case, I would say actively regressing, and in Smee's case, I would just kind of say kind of perpetually kind of stuck there as more childlike. You know, Smee is probably this hybrid we've spent the least amount of time on, but he's the one who definitely seems the most just like, this is fun. I'm still a kid. I'm going to hang out. I'm going to do, and like, you know, it's telling that he's the one who has a lot more of the kid-like behaviors. Like he blows the raspberry and he's like, you know, like flopping around. Like maybe your batteries will just run out like this. And it's a very good performance by Jonathan and Ajay to like evoke that childhood like tendency. But the character of Nibs is clearly like the one who is still like, you know, her childlike response seems to be actively grounded in trauma. It's telling that, like, you know, they're doing an official podcast, an Alien Earth podcast after every episode that I've been listening to. And the host of that podcast, Adam Rogers, did interview the actress who plays the actress who plays Nibs, Lily Newmark. And she talks about the fact that even though it's not like definitively locked down, one of the conversations that she had when she was crafting her character was the idea that clearly Nibs has something in her past, some kind of trauma that is affecting her and has kind of been reactivated by the traumatic experiences that she is now going through. And whether that's some kind of physical assault or, you know, some kind of abuse that she suffered as a kid, it's manifesting now in a way that is causing her to, you know, essentially break with reality. And, you know, and retreat into the childlike fantasies of the idea that, one, actively denying that she is now in a synthetic body, like, and being aggressive anytime someone brings that up to her, and kind of indulging in fantasies like this idea that she's going to have a baby, which is now biologically impossible for her. And I do want to talk about like the other character's reaction to that. This is clearly like, it's not a healthy response. It's not a healthy behavior. And you're right. She clearly does need someone to talk to her. And Dame Sylvia tries, but Dame Sylvia doesn't go about it the right way, because Dame Sylvia has an active interest in these characters and the experiment working. She's not an impartial observer. And so she pushes Nibs too hard, and she kind of gets a wake-up call. But I like that we have characters who are more adult, and we have the characters who are more childlike, and then we have, I think, the two characters in the middle, which are our protagonist Wendy and the character of Slightly, formerly Arush, played by Adarsh Gurab, and they seem to be the characters who, you know, they still have childlike elements, but they also have more adult elements. You know, Wendy still acts like a child at times. She has her stuffed animals, you know, and, you know, her devotion to her brother, but she's also like incredibly capable and, you know, pushing her boundaries. And the character of Slightly is having to deal with these, you know, much more, you know, adult decisions now of loyalty and betrayal. And I think it's telling that these two characters in the middle are the only two characters where we've actually seen they still have a connection to their families, their human families. Wendy with her brother Joe, and in Slightly's case, his mother and his brothers, who are now being actively threatened by Morrow as a way to coerce him. So that kind of like helps break things off into ways like it's giving us different answers and different perspectives, or if someone were to go through this process, how would they react? We're getting to see all of it.
Yeah, the interesting thing with Slightly is that I feel like he made a transition from I actually saw him as being very much like Smee initially, of sort of still being very kid-like and just sort of goofing around and having fun. I think what kickstarts his sort of growth, for lack of a better term, is that he has his innocence taken away. Courtesy of Morrow, who is, I dare say, more frightening than the actual aliens. And it's such a violation, even before, Slightly's mother and family are threatened. It's just the very act of like invading his personal space and not leaving him alone. And, it's just, it's heartbreaking to sort of watch, Slightly's character just have to go through that. And it's like I said, it's a loss of innocence. It completely, sort of ejects him from, from who he was. And he has to all of a sudden grapple with these very adult things. And I'm very worried about where that's going to lead him next.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is kind of, these movies have kind of always a darker undertone to them, like not just in the fact that there's literal aliens, that are an active threat, but just the actual, it's not subtle in the fact that one of the big ideas about why the Alien franchise is so horrifying to many of us is the idea that it has to deal with violation, violation of your body being essentially impregnated, raped against your will, and being forced to give birth to this terrifying creature, this thing. And that element of violation has been present in every Alien movie. It's present in this show. But there's also a more subtle form of it, which is exactly what you pointed out, the kind of the psychological violation of the abuse that all of these characters, these kids, are being put through, not only by the person who created them, Boy Cavalier, who is sending them on missions that they probably should not be going on and are not prepared for, but as you said, the character of Morrow literally like invading the mind of Slightly and, talking to him and, coercing him. One could even say grooming him in a way to do this task. And I think that it's, obviously a very dark and, uncomfortable thing for us to reckon with, but it's one of the reasons this show has been so psychologically rich, is because it's not shying away from questions like that and, ideas like that. And the question is just, how will the characters respond? Will they become more proactive and take charge of their destiny, or will they crumble? Will they regress? And again, I think we're seeing the full scope of how that can go.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the very concept of turning these children who are all, ill to the point of, being close to death, and using them as guinea pigs to, create, these prototypes of the first, human synth hybrids. And the concept is definitely like put forward by by the character of Arthur. That, worst case scenario, we've killed a bunch of kids. And especially on rewatching that first episode, like that was very much like on my mind of like, I think my first time through the episode, I just took it for granted. Like, this is the process. They're turning Marcy into, taking her brain and carrying it over to, a synth body. But then on my second view through, I looked at that opening as like, you can view it in two ways of, them, of Dame Sylvia walking her to her new body, or also walking her to her death. And it's a very like unnerving thing. And then, that presents us with these questions that this show poses of what are these hybrids? Are they the children? Are they their actual, whatever you want to call it, like selves, souls, like present in these new bodies? Or is it just a synthetic, creature, that has the memories, of the child, but is not actually the child. And it's, and it's just this really freaky thing that question is posed to Wendy's brother, and he doesn't want to answer that question because it's possibly too hard for him to contemplate the truth of it. I think he just wants to go with his emotional truth. And yeah, I'm kind of like, I'm not even sure what we're supposed to make of that. I don't think we're supposed to have an answer to that. And I'll be interested to see how I feel about that when the end of the season hits. But it is a very freaky thing. And as much as there are moments where, you see, Wendy's love for her brother coming through, and you're like, well, that seems like in that sense, it, very much seems to be her. But then you're like, other times you're like, but something about all of them is just a bit off, and so the whole thing is a very twisty, disturbing, uncomfortable like thing, and I obviously that's on purpose, but yeah, it's possibly that this show starts off with the murder of of children, and it's it's freaky.
It is freaky, and it's again, it's a core idea that science fiction, stories like this often wrestle with, because there is actually even though it's being shown in a slightly different way, there is actually a name for this exact kind of thought experiment, psychological phenomenon. It's the Star Trek teletransportation paradox, which builds on the idea of the whole classic fun idea of beam me up, Scotty, and for the longest time people were just like, oh, that's fun, it's the teleportation. Then people thought, wait a minute, if you are actually disassembling someone down to their atomic level and then reassembling them in a completely different place, are you actually transporting, or you're just killing the original and creating a new perfect copy of them somewhere else? And people have struggled with that idea, because that's not the
why I never want teleportation to be a thing.
Exactly. And not even considering the fact that when you get reassembled, is everything going to be in the right place? Is it? But in terms of yes, it all comes back.
No more beaming. This time I'm going to walk.
Yeah, indeed. But in terms of the idea at the core of it, it really comes down to the idea that when people think like, well, what makes a human, what makes a person have like a soul and a consciousness, the answer is oftentimes seems to be, for most people, well, it's the idea of emotion and memory and connection. Those are what actually makes a person who they are, what they are, all their little eccentricities, all their little, things that are like, their imperfections in a way, but also their relationship to other people. I think in a lot of cases in this, if something artificial has those connections, then we do ultimately come down on the side of it being human. And like we had mentioned Blade Runner earlier, that is kind of like Blade Runner's philosophy. Those beings are pure or artificially created, but the entire point of the series seems to be, particularly in something like Blade 49, that they can, in many respects, be more human than human, even though they never were human, because they have these connections and these emotional relationships and these memories, and that allows them to transcend the physical status of what their body is. And in this case, in many respects, I do think that the show is perhaps leaning towards the idea, like it's leaning on the idea that, yes, this is Marcy, she is still present in Wendy. She has all her memories, she has her connection and love for her brother, it's her. But I think exactly as you pointed out, I think that the show doesn't want it to be that simple. I think it wants it to be a kind of a both and situation where it's like, yes, she has all of Wendy's memories and emotions and thoughts, but there is something different about her. She has changed. She is not exactly the same person that she was when she lay down on that table and went to sleep and then woke up in Wendy's body. And in many respects, like we had talked about that scene with Dame Sylvia and Kirsch when they're talking to Wendy, and I actually think there was a very important, piece of context there where, first there's the funny comment where they ask her like how you're feeling, and she focused on her new breasts, and she's like, these are weird. Which is a very childlike response. They move about when she runs. But then they ask her about her emotions, how she's feeling, and she says, I don't know. They're quiet now. And Kirsch has a very interesting line where he says, the human body manufactures hormones, dopamine, serotonin, estrogen, testosterone to help, drive and stimulate the process of emotions. And then he has the little almost sing-song, you don't have those anymore. And that is an example of Kirsch, I think, tipping his card of the idea that, like, Wendy isn't human anymore. She's a synthetic. She's more like me. We should be treating her more like she's a synthetic. And I actually think synthetics are superior because he later goes on to say, human beings, they used to be food. Then they got big brains and they built big tools and they built impossible machines and they went to space and they told themselves they weren't food anymore. But there's always a bigger fish out there and something that would eat them if they could. And he kind of, I think, views himself as apart from that because, he can walk by the alien eggs and they're not going to open because they don't want to infect him because he's not a biologically.
By the way, one of my favorite moments of the entire season so far is when he sees the way the egg is responding to Boy Cavalier. And just immediately like pushes him out of the room. He's like, okay, enough of that.
And what's great about it is that I actually think that there's a moment where he hesitates, where he's almost, curious what would happen. It's like, I know that, like, I know this guy created me, and I know I'm like conditioned to be loyal to him, but what if I just let the alien? and then his programming takes over. But yeah, it's I think
there's another bit from the podcast where he talks about like Kurt, the most like physical sign of rebelling that Kirsch has is like a smile.
Yeah.
And that's all he can do to instead of like smacking Boy across the face or something.
Yeah, I actually, ever since I heard that on the podcast, I've been watching for Curse's facial expressions anytime he's interacting with Boy Cavalier, looking for the smile, particularly when Boy Cavalier insults him. And I've seen it a couple of times, and now it is actually just definitively established that anytime Boy Cavalier, says something to Curse and Curse smiles, what he's actually thinking is, "I hate your fucking guts so much."
Oh God. Yeah, and by the way, I do just want to take a moment to like really like shower praise on Timothy Olyphant's
What?
performance. He's so, I mean, and I'm biased because I always love everything that Timothy Olyphant does.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you? Because
Yeah.
he's so brilliant. But I just love what he's doing, and I love the design of the character. Like the white hair, and and I just love his like. It's so funny that he's a synthetic, but he's so damn sarcastic. Everything he says, which I just love. For me, like he is up there with like he definitely reminds me of, even though I don't think he's I think that Bishop is warmer, but he reminds me of Bishop,
Mm-hmm.
a bit. And yeah, but I do want to say, like, I think one of the really great things about him, that's like the first glimpse that we get of him, which I think really helps with sort of our understanding of the character, is that even like before Marcy becomes Wendy, we see Kirsch interacting with Marcy and talking with, and he's very kind with her. He's very, like patient with her, and even imparting some wisdom. And so like, and I don't know how much of that is his programming or, whatever, but I do get the sense that he's not someone who is cruel for the sake of being cruel ever. Um, and I think that opening scene really endears him to us, even though he spends most of the rest of the time, like I said, being incredibly sarcastic, but in a way that's also endearing because of the people he's usually sarcastic towards. But yeah, I love what he does in the show, and I'm even like more intrigued based on the things that he is keeping to himself as these episodes go on. And I'm like, oh, what what is he intending to do or let happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I agree with all your praise for Timothy Olyphant. He has been one of my favorite actors working on television for a long time. He has a couple of like all-time characters under his belt in obviously, Raylan Givens on Justified, and Sheriff Seth Bullock in Deadwood. And more recently, he was great as Cobb Vanth in in the Mandalorian, and he's been on Fargo and a bunch of other shows, and he's done some movies as well. He's always good in everything. I have to acknowledge that, because he is so damn good at it. Perpetually in my mind, if I'm thinking of Timothy Olyphant, I'm thinking of him with a cowboy hat in a Western or Western-inspired setting, making, sarcastic jokes before he pulls out his gun and shoots the bad guy with seconds to spare because he's just that fast and good. So when I heard he was going to be playing in this show and he was going to be playing an android, I was like, that's interesting. That's kind of a little bit outside the box for his, the roles that I am used to seeing him. But obviously, he's an incredibly versatile actor. He can handle it. And I just think what he's been doing is he has, as you said, playing a very different character, but with some of that same wry charm that is a Timothy Olyphant staple. And but playing it in a way that makes it clear that he is not, he is not human. He is something else. And I do think that he is not. I don't see him as a fully villainous character in the way that I like. I don't think any of these characters are fully villainous, although some like Boy Cavalier are pretty.
I'm still like, and yet,
yeah,
he's not yet past the era where it seems that between the time of Alien and Aliens, like, it's been discovered that the synthetic programming is not as refined as it could be. And they have a tendency to kind of, do things that are not in the best interests of the humans around them. And we're not yet past that point. So I'm like, and based on stuff going on with him in that last episode, I'm like, this could go badly. But we'll see.
Well, we'll see. And but what I mean by that is that, like, I think that it actually is really important that the show is, given us those slightly warmer moments, like the scene with the scorpion with young Marcy in the beginning, where he actually does seem to be listening to her and respecting her. And caring for her in his own way. And I think he does. I think he does care for all these kids, but it's kind of you mentioned that the dynamic of, like, him and Dame Sylvia almost being like mom and dad in that scene for Wendy. And I do think that he is very much, in many respects, the little bit more disappointed dad in a lot of these interactions, where he cares about these kids, but as I've said a couple of times,
with your eyes.
I was just about to call that moment out where he's about to look with your eye. That is such a dad thing to say, and also, but I think that it's more just the fact that again, he seems to think like anytime these kids do something that he sees it more as a human response, kind of an emotionally immature response. He's basically just like, come on, you're better than that. And like, show me who you really are. Show me you can be, better than the humans you've transcended. So I think that but he does so in a way that makes it clear that he does still have some of those same affectations themselves, like, as you said, his wonderful sarcasm, because, that is something that, like, theoretically, like, if you were making an android, you might not want to program it to be so sarcastic, because then it's going to use it, and it's going to use it a lot. And
I'm thinking of Interstellar. Somebody upped his sarcasm level a bit too high.
Yeah, which if you're going to make a Timothy Olyphant android, you got to put the sarcasm levels high, because that's what he does better than almost anybody.
But I think what's really interesting is that in the midst of trying to sort of lecture Wendy at the end of the first episode about, like, human beings, and you used to be food, or rather you convinced yourselves that you weren't food anymore, and like, I think he thinks he's going to win that argument, or at least have the final word, when he's talking about her brother, and of course he's going to die, and then the fact that she comes back with, no, he's not going to die, I'm going to save him. And I think the fact that, like, I think that's a very important moment between the two of them, because I think that shows him that she is challenging him on this point of what she is. And that to her, it's not an open and shut case of she's a synthetic now. I think she's staking her claim as, if not entirely human, at least something more than what he's trying to say she is. And I think the moment that the fact that he lets that sit and just sort of hang in the air, like, is, I think, his acknowledgement from him that she is going to decide who and what she is. And so I quite like that moment, where it's kind of like, Yeah, you need to be quiet with the with the sort of lecturing of who and what I am. I'll let you know.
Yeah. No. And I think that ultimately it's, going back to the Dame Sylvia and Timothy and Kirsch dynamic of being kind of mom and dad. They are also representing in many ways two different paths that Wendy can take, because flipping from Kirsch to Dame Sylvia is emphatic in her belief that no, these children are human. They are still human. And that is the entire point of why we're doing what we're doing, is we're trying to preserve and prolong human life. And so she needs to be as human as possible. And she's quite, and she thinks of all these synthetics as her children, as her, not her biological children that she hasn't been able to have yet with her husband, Arthur, but as basically her life's work, her mission, someone to protect. And obviously she cares about them and loves them in her own way, but she, as I said, she also is kind of a compromised, view on it, because they are something different than human, at least in the way that, their bodies work now. And she, that scene where she tries to sit Nibs down and basically tried to give her the version of the birds and the bees talk, and Nibs is not having any of it, is darkly funny in its own way, given what's going on with Nibs. But it kind of speaks to the way that Dame Sylvia is approaching this, the idea of like, oh, these are children, like this I'm still talking to them like they're children, and when she gets a wake-up call in that scene with Nibs, it's the first moment that she realizes, oh, this being that I created, that I helped bring into this world as a mother word, it's something beyond my control now. And that, I think, is a moment that all parents probably have, where they, and it's a terrifying moment for her. But it's one of those things where, again, she represents a path that Wendy could take. But I think, as you said, Wendy is going to be forging her own path. And I think that, as we alluded to, that path is kind of going to be shown to her by the xenomorph in a weird way. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, Wendy still thinks that she's human, in many respects. And a large part of that is driven by the fact that of her connection to her brother, because he is the one part of her life that, has carried over now, and even before she was reunited with him, like, she was thinking about him constantly. Like those scenes in I think it's episode 1, where she's watching him on the monitor and her eyes are just like tracking him, and like you can almost see like the longing there for her to like almost like reach through the screen and touch him, which she almost kind of does, really. It's clear to her that, she knows that this person means something to her. And even if theoretically, like, she is not Wendy anymore, like, or she's not Marcy anymore, like, it's that is still true. That is still there. That's not like a programming glitch, that she's like, I love that person. I want to save that person. I want to protect that person. And so that is something that it's a connection that is keeping her grounded in many respects, but that connection is going to be strained and tested by the different forces that are pulling on her in different directions. And I think that that's really where the heart of the show is going to just be decided.
Yeah. Which, by the way, and we'll get into more of their dynamic, but just want to go ahead and shout out Alex Lawther, who, I was excited when I saw him in the trailer, because, as you know, a lot of us know him from Andor, and we loved him so much in that show. And so, yeah, really glad to see him in this. Let me see if I'm
also very happy to see Essie Davis, who is you will remember as Lady Crane from Game of Thrones, and I thought that she was wonderful on that show, and I think that she's great in this one as well.
Yeah. Also want to go ahead and shout out Adrian Edmondson, who might be a little lesser known, but he's a Star Wars alumni.
Yes, he is.
He played member of the First Order in The Last Jedi. I believe he's tooling with you, sir.
That is such a great little mo.
Yeah. And I knew I recognized him from somewhere, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I looked up the credits. I was like, oh, that's right.
Yeah, he was also in Three Body Problem recently, so he has a tendency to show up in these kinds of shows, counseling, shall we say, morally immature dictators types.
Yeah. No, I've really enjoyed his performance in this. He's he's the frightening sort of henchman. Or second in command, or what have you. The one who takes care of the dirty work. So like, he's very much threatening to characters that we care about, and yet somehow I'm really enjoying his character.
Yeah. No, I think it's the quintessential like Britishness of him, basically, like the fact that like, because Boy Cavalier presents himself in a very off-kilter way, shall we say, walking around with his bare feet and his outlandish clothes and his kind of wild, manic Peter Pan energy. And it's just darkly funny that his right-hand man is a classic, like, stiff upper-lipped British, hardened executive type, who, like, Boy Cavalier will be like, send them off to do this wild mission. He's just like, very good, sir.
I also like the fact that he does challenge Boy on his decisions. He like, once Boy tells him to shut up, he's not going to push it any further. But like, he does seem to be a voice of common sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of why I enjoy his character too.
Yeah, and I do think that as much as Boy Cavalier is capable of respecting anyone, which I think is not very much, I do think he has at least a modicum of respect for Edmondson, just because for Adam Eanes is the character's name, but just because there is that moment in episode 4 where he does send all the other characters out of the room so that he can talk to Adam, and Adam actually has a very wise thing to say, which is that if a hostile alien species has started to speak, one needs to be asking why. and you're like, yes, that is a good thought. And then Boy Cavalier is, listens to that advice and then doesn't take it.
Another great exchange between it's like, if one of those were to escape, and Boy's like, glass half full. It's like, you dumb shit.
Yeah. And he also is like, are you sure you don't want to just give these creatures back to Yutani and let them be her problem? And Boy Scout was like, no. Yeah. So I don't want to wake up with an embryo implanted in my belly, which, fair, because I don't think these creatures would be safer in Wayland and Yutani's hands, clearly.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he's not wrong to like kind of want to wash his hands of this entire project. He's like, we had a good thing going here with this synths, and now there's all these yucky alien creatures running around, and I don't care for it.
Oh God! And another, what Kirsch says, was it worth it? Was what worth it? Risking 10 years of progress on a shiny new thing.
Yeah.
And Boy's like, my, you're all so testy today. Oh God! Yeah. Again, like, Boy Cavalier is a absolutely detestable character, but Samuel Blenkin is giving just one hell of a performance because he is always fun to watch.
Yeah.
let's go ahead and do the mid roll right now, and then dive into some other stuff. Yeah, so next week we're going to be doing a 30th anniversary discussion on Batman Forever. Very much looking forward to that. Also, I wanted to apologize. We did announce that AK was going to be joining us this week. I think she got busy with some other things, so hopefully we can arrange to have her on in the future. I'd love to have her on next week for Batman Forever, but regardless, we're going to have a blast talking about that. I was listening to the soundtrack last night, and I was like, yes, this movie is so like gloriously campy in all the best ways. And so looking forward to having that conversation. Then the week after that, we're going to be talking about Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and I believe then we're taking a break after that, and because I'll be on a trip to go to a convention. So then when we come back, we'll be tackling the final episodes of this show. So yeah, got some fun stuff ahead. Yeah, I don't have any like show and tell this week. I haven't been spending as much money. I'm looking forward to the calendar flipping over to September, so I get to start over with my budget.
Well, that'll be happening tomorrow. So don't spend it all at once.
No, definitely not. But yeah, no. So I guess that's it. You got anything you want to talk about for the mid roll?
Not really. I mean, I think football season has started up again, so that has kind of it's been taking up most of my time and energy. For good or bad, mostly for bad recently. If anyone has been following my thoughts on the Jerry Jones, Micah Parsons situation, but I think that it's I am looking forward very much to what we're having coming up, and then in kind of looking ahead to what we will be doing the rest of the year, just because we still have a number of big projects that we're hoping to fit in before the calendar year turns, including our Pride and Prejudice big retrospective, which it's only a couple months away now, and I still no sign of that 4K, but I just think that when we do that one, it's just going to be it'll be a long time in the making, because that was our very first stream together on and we're now approaching, like, I think we've done like 80 of these on this channel so far, so it's it'll be a big one.
I'm still holding out hope for that 4K. Because they nowadays they do tend to have quick turnarounds with announcements and and stuff actually coming out. I've got my fingers crossed. So we'll see. If it doesn't come out this year, hopefully it's in the not too distant future. Because like, as well as some of the other Kira period pieces, like, you think with all the eye candy on display with like all the costumes and set design and stuff, that a number of those movies would be easy candidates to get the 4K treatment. Because I'm also thinking about movies like The Duchess and Anna Karenina, which I think would both look absolutely stunning in 4K. So but yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. I miss our Keira Knightley period piece era, but I will say that if I am actually enjoying the new Keira Knightley blood pounding conspiracy thriller era, because the one thing that did come out this week was the trailer for The Woman in Cabin 10, and I was just like, Oh yeah, we're at the very least we're going to be getting some good Keira Knightley content before the end of the year.
And that came as a little bit of a surprise because I was not expecting to get the trailer until next month. So I was very happy to see that, and I was like, "Yeah, inject this into my veins. I am ready." Yeah, and so looking forward to that, and yeah, it's just I've been watching a lot of other shows right now, mostly trying to ensure that I don't like spend any money on on anything. So I've been like just throwing myself into a bunch of like binge watching of shows on like Netflix and stuff. And I did mention this before. I've been watching the 2-season reboot of Quantum Leap, which I missed when it was originally on the air, and that's been a lot of fun because I was griping about the minimal amount of Mason Alexander Park in The Sandman, and that is not the case on Quantum Leap. They are in a lot of that show, so it's made up for that. So very, very happy about that.
Well, one thing that I did see actually this past week that I wanted to shout out for anyone who has not gone to see it. I finally got out to see the new movie Weapons, and that was real good. I was very much in the like that was a movie when I saw the trailer in the theaters. That trailer like disturbed me in a way that trailers rarely do, and when I went to see the movie, I thought that it really it lived up to the billing. In terms of being a very like dark and scary movie, but also one that has a good emotional core, was also kind of funny at times, riveting throughout, and I think that the director Zach Kreger has a promising future in looking ahead, and Amy Madigan, who plays a very scary character that movie, is actually getting like low-key Oscar buzz for it that I think is actually quite well deserved. So it's a good one.
Yeah, I've been so busy with other stuff that's not necessarily something that's piqued my interest, but it's like I'm just waiting to see how long before Trish tries to guilt me into watching it. She's already said that we absolutely are going to watch what is that called, the K-pop Demon Hunter when I go over to her place for the Ocala convention. So
I've heard that is just a riding good time, which I have not seen it yet, but just because I had it wasn't something that was on my radar until it became like a phenomenon, and now I kind of feel like I have to watch it. But I'm sure once I do, I will have all the songs stuck in my head for a week.
See, okay, there's two things with that, and we're going to get back into our actual discussion in a second. But like, I don't really care about K-pop, so so like that's not that part of it is not of interest to me, and also it's sort of the fact that everybody all of a sudden started going crazy for this thing that I'd never heard of, and I'm kind of like, out of pure stubbornness, like, yeah, I don't really care about it. But that doesn't matter because Trish is gonna make me. She said it was either that or I was gonna have to watch The Substance, and I'm like, okay, that's definitely not happening. So so yeah, I want to enjoy the convention that weekend. I don't want to be suffering from nightmares. He says as we're talking about this show. But yeah, so I guess I'll be watching K-pop Demon Hunters.
I think there's kind of a fun dynamic where like somebody occasionally it can be fun to indulge in the old man, yells at a cloud / get off my lawn trope of everyone being like, oh my God, this new thing is the greatest thing ever. And you're just like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Nope, not me.
Exactly.
You youngins and your demon hunting K-pop stars.
Yeah, that's like, I think that's the major thing for me. It's like everybody's going on about it and going on about the music, and I'm like, y'all realize that I have zero interest in K-pop. Like that is not that is not a thing on which you're going to win me over for this. Talk about the animation, talk about like the action, go at it from that direction, but don't come at it from the K-pop side, because I'm like, no. But anyway, so yeah, that's me being the cranky old man. Let's get back into talking about Alien. Okay, so oh God, where do we even want to go next with this? God, I don't even know. Because we've been all over the place already. Like, this is definitely one of those streams where we're just jumping all over. But yeah, okay, I know what I wanted to talk about, because we're already broaching the topic somewhat in relation to Nibs and her talk with Dame Sylvia, and when she kind of loses it, gets really aggressive. Actually, it's interesting because I think that this scene, her conversation with Nibs, obviously, as it should, is setting off alarm bells. But interestingly, I think that it's maybe one of the most convincing arguments for the fact that what they did actually worked. Because I think that what's happening with Nibs, in addition to whatever she was going through before, like, she is definitely having a reaction to the fact that this human brain has been transposed into a synthetic life form, and that human part of her is like still sort of reeling from the shock of that and these almost unnaturalness of that. And so I think that is a really compelling argument for the fact that the humanity did get transposed into this new form. So, and I wonder if that's going to occur to them, or if they will be focused on this is an instance of this going horribly wrong, or if they'll have a fair appreciation for the fact that, for sort of both of those things, that we do need to be concerned about this, obviously, but also this is humanity sort of trying to break loose and, and go beyond the confines of this sort of synthetic host that it's in.
No, I think that it hopefully would be a sign to them that yes, these are still human children, that you have successfully transplanted their minds into these bodies, and that they need to be cared for as human children. But because this is a company run by a tech oligarch who is trying to push the boundaries of science with a lack of morals, I think unfortunately what it's going to be is basically like, oh, this part, they're going to treat it more as like something to be contained, something to be locked down, something of a threat, I think that one of the characters that we haven't touched on as much, who is kind of sounding that particular alarm bell, is Dame Sylvia's husband, Arthur, who is kind of like the lead technician in many ways. It's kind of implied like he's kind of the one who actually is like built the body, built the hardware of all these kids. Dame Sylvia is probably a little bit more on like the the intellectual, theoretical side, but like this Arthur is the one who actually seems to be the one who, like, when they're having their something goes wrong, he's the one who like plugs them in and reboots them and figures out the hardware issue. And so he knows that they're machines, and he's hoping that they are, the kids, still have the human consciousness, because that's what he and Dame Sylvia were working for. But he is the one who's going in with his eyes open. I think that Dame Sylvia is a little bit too close to the situation, both emotionally and to the fact that she's higher ranking in the company. She's having more conversations with Boy Cavalier. She basically she is, she's a little bit more caught up on in the Jurassic Park sense of the, like, the eternal question of, like, yeah, you were so wrapped up in the idea of whether or not you didn't think about whether or not you should. And to as Ian Malcolm would say. And I think that Dame Sylvia is much more on the could side of it, and Arthur is starting to have doubts of, should we have done this? We need to be prepared.
I'm starting to become worried for Arthur's longevity.
Oh, I think there is no chance that he makes it out of this show alive. There's the prospect of, slightly unfortunately, has to been tasked by Morrow with getting a human host for one of the aliens so they can smuggle it out of the compound, and clearly slightly has set his sights on Joe, kind of out of resentment and jealousy. But Joe shows up in the trailers later and seems fine. I don't see that many more shots of Arthur. I think it's going to have to be Arthur who gets that fate. But I will want to acknowledge, like, one of my absolute favorite little moments of facial acting in this entire show so far, and one of the most darkly funny moments, is when Arthur is having the conversation with Dame Sylvia outside in the little enclave away from the prying eyes and ears of the corporation, and he's expressing his concerns and his worry, and she's trying to talk him down, like, come on, you're worrying too much about this, we'll have dinner. And then Nibs flounces up and announces that she's pregnant, and he's like, you can't be pregnant, you're a machine. And she's like, why would you say that? And then when she's going, like, it's not all those other horrible things he said, it's a baby. And Arthur just has this look where Dame Sylvia is looking at Nibs like, what's going on here? And Arthur just had this wide-eyed turning to look at his wife, and it's just basically like, hello, this is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I was worried about. He's basically like, this is bad. This is bad news. And I just thought it was a really funny silent interaction the two of them was having. It's one of those moments where, like, a classic comic beat where everyone's like, don't worry, everything's fine, it's all fine, and then immediately something like crashes down in the back.
The part of that scene that I really love is when he's like practically dragging her into a secluded space not covered by any cameras, and she's like, whatever it is, we have talked about this in the lab, and he's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. No. Yeah, I mean, like, he clearly does not trust or like Boy Cavalier that much, even though he works for him. And I think it actually, to kind of humanize his reaction a little bit, he talks about the fact in that scene where, Dame Sylvia, they're talking about the process that they underwent, and the fact that Boy Cavalier sent them out as basically like a field test, and when they weren't ready. And Dame Sylvia was basically like, it worked clearly, like that, this is, they all came back, we're getting good data from this. And he has the line, yes, but that's not science. That's not, basically what science is a rigorous process with controls and experimentation and, and repetition and, and we're trying to prove or disprove a theory. And, like, what Boy Cavalier is doing is throwing shit at the wall and seeing whether or not it sticks. So
yeah, like, Yeah, let's talk about the fact that Wendy, so desperate to save her brother, so like comes in while they're all talking about something else, and she's like, "We can do it," and it's like, "Do what?" It's like we can go in, assess, help, you know, uh, whatever, and like anybody in their sane mind would be like, no. And he's just like, yeah, sure, do it. He's just, and because he knows that the reason she wants to do it is, as Kerr states, the brother, and he sees like how like indignant she is, and it's like, look, if that's not human there, I don't know what is. And so then he's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, because he's just interested in the data it's gonna give him, and he doesn't give a rat's ass. It's taken all these years of research and getting to this point, and he's like, yeah, sure, it'll be fun. And this is what lunatic, billionaires are allowed. They're allowed to make crazy ass decisions, and nobody says anything to them because they unfortunately have all the power. And you're just like, you dumb fuck. And then by some miracle they make it back, although not without scars, in the case of Nibs especially, and Wendy, who is horribly damaged, and but he's like, hey, it all worked out in the end. And when he starts getting the data, and he's like, it's like Christmas. And you just want to smack the shit out of him. So yeah, although I will say, I really do love, after they get the go ahead, I love Wendy's armoring up montage.
Oh yeah.
It was very Aragorn.
Well, I love the fact that she, like, it's the two sides. She packs her stuffed animal, and she packs her katana. That's I'm like, that's just kind of showing you where the dual sides of her right there. And and the fact that they're when they're marching out there, like, with Kirsch in the lead, is like all like, looking like commando style, and you're just like, I mean, they look badass. It's just that you almost forget in that moment that they are kids until they
you're
actually,
like, these are children. What the fuck is happening?
Yeah. Oh man, talking about just the fact that
and here's the thing, I really do want to, like, this stuff used to seem, and I'm talking specifically about like the dumbassery of sending the fact that they're both children, and that they're like highly expensive prototypes that have taken years to develop. Like, on both those counts, this is the kind of thing that once upon a time you could have watched this in this show and like scoffed at the unbelievability of something like that. But we unfortunately now realize the hubris and idiocy of these tech billionaires, and nothing about this felt like it was hard to swallow. I was like, no, that makes absolute perfect sense. And it's just, and it just makes me, like, that kind of stupidity just makes me angry about our real world and the current state of things, because I recognize that kind of stupidity from the real world. And I'm
Yeah.
like, not exactly in the same context, but on that same level of, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, no, to be perfectly honest, if I was ranking Boy Cavalier's decisions to send these highly expensive, prototypes with the minds of children into an active combat zone against an extraterrestrial force, I might place it maybe fifth or sixth on the list of utterly dumbass things I've seen tech billionaires like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg do in the past couple of years alone. So, yeah, he's par for the course.
It's the same reason why, like, I remember when season 6 of Game of Thrones came out, and we had Euron's big pitch to the Iron Islanders, as to why he should lead. And it's like, and there was a period where that came out where it was like, I was a little bit on board with the whole, in what world does this pitch like garner any support? But then just mere months after the fact, when we had who was sending, unfortunately, to the highest office of the land, and all the bullshit that we've had to endure, since then and ongoing. Now I look at that sequence and I'm like, nope, completely buy it.
Yep.
Everything about that tracks.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like what world would that happen? This world is where.
Yeah. So yeah. It's unfortunately the real world has made some of these like decisions and character traits seem a lot more realistic, and I'm so depressed by that.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously, like, this show is commenting on that. It's and it's a rather withering comment, I would say, because Samuel Blenkin's, again, phenomenal performance. He is unsparing in how he is depicting the callousness of and Boy Cavalier is aptly named. He has a very cavalier attitude and he is most certainly very much still a boy, and. I do think that it's telling that in some of his interactions with other characters, like the more serious characters, like his conversation with Yutani when she's calling him to demand that he give her specimens back, and he's having the conversation like tilted on his bed, holding his fucking iPad in his feet, and it's basically like, "Sucks to be you." But I'm just like, I'm like, the other heads of the companies must just be like, how do we have to deal with this guy?
Jeez, I wonder what kind of real world relevance that has.
Exactly. And I think that one of the points that because that podcast we keep mentioning, the official Alien Earth podcast, the host Adam Rogers is on our side in the sense that he keeps asking the question: is Boy Cavalier actually a genius, or does he just think he is? And I think the answer is that he is intelligent about, in like the purest technical term of the idea that yes, he obviously has created this massive company and has pushed the boundaries of this once thought impossible science. But just because you're really, 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 really smart about one thing does not mean you can't be really, 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 really dumb about other things, particularly with respect to emotional intelligence.
When I heard that on the podcast, I just kept thinking about Glass Onion. And Miles Braun is an idiot.
Yeah, that is another unsparing portrayal. I think it's okay. Because they're unfortunately hold so much power in their world, tech oligarchs are kind of a universal punching bag at this point, and I say they're fair game.
Yeah, exactly. Oh god. Which, by the way, we've mentioned it a couple times now. If you're watching the show and you haven't listened to the podcast that goes along with it, go ahead and listen to it because it's great. It offers like interviews from many of the key players on this show. It's a great alternative to surfing social media after the episode. Listen to the actual people who had something to do with the show. But yeah, it's yeah, again, like a great performance, but yeah, there's just so many times during this show where I just want to smack the living shit out of Boy Cavalier, and like it makes me want to vomit just saying his name. Although it's incredibly apt. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, because we've been very focused on the human and synthetic side of the things. Let's like go into like the actual creatures of the show, and like we have, of course, the the titular alien, the xenomorph, who like I freaking love what we've gotten from it so far. It's just something about the way they've designed it for the show where it's very classic, but also I sort of love the fact that more than ever, when it's baring its teeth at it's about to be victims, it almost looks like it's really grinning at them, which I find sort of both funny and terrifying. And like it's just the way the alien is performed and stuff. It really goes back to that notion that this is actually a really intelligent creature who, if you're face to face with it, you're dead, and and you should be scared shitless. And I don't feel like we can really talk about it without talking about the dinner party. Yeah. Which obviously that's filled with great commentary too, which is irrelevant. But I just sort of love the fact that these people live such the high life that, like, what, a spaceship crashed into this building? Who cares? We're having a party going on. That doesn't concern us. And then minute later, what's all this noise out here? And and then they all get ripped to shreds. And and we don't even like see most of that while it's happening. We're actually, on the outer part of the room with the character of Joe. And and then we go in and we see all these bodies just ripped apart, and and the main guy who answered the door, he's dragging himself along on the floor, cut in two, all Darth Maul style. I don't think he'll be coming back to life though.
No.
It's just, it's so bloody, so gruesome, so disgusting, and I loved it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of the things that the people behind the show talked about is the fact that, in an alien movie, you have your set cast of characters and you walk in with the assumption that most of them are probably going to die. And until we get to the final girl at the end, and I think that in this case, like, because it's a TV show and you have to build a larger emotional relationship with characters over the course of, the full series, you can't just walk in and start picking your cast members off like immediately. But it's still an alien show and people gotta die. And I think we're going to be seeing some of that stuff next week with the unfortunate crew of the Maginot. But this was an opportunity where the show just gets to, we know you want to see the alien kill some people, so we're going to give you the most obnoxious crowd of people that you could imagine, and we're just going to let it rip. And that was like everything about that scene from like one of the scene where Boy Cavalier is watching the ship crash and they're talking about like sending the team in. He has an understated line that kind of really, is one of the more damning things that he said, is where he says, triage the rescue by income bracket, aka save the rich people first and the poor people can get fucked. But as it turns out, the rich people don't want to be saved because they're party and they don't care that the ship crashed into the bottom. And he's like, talk to Boy Cavalier. He and I belong to the same club. And you're like, I don't think you're going to get that chance.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's like, I don't like, we've had this conversation like off air. Like, I don't share the same sort of bloodthirst that people seem to have in the, in the real world, with regards to like, like billionaires and the higher ups and like, I'm not the type of person who's going to go on the internet and says, they deserve this or that, but it did add a certain deliciousness within the fictional confines of this show. It's like the fact that they thought they were so above to that degree. It's like, y'all deserve what you get. And and it was just like, when that guy answered the door and was like, we're having a party, please don't disturb it. It was like, what the fuck? It felt so weird.
Yeah. Speaking of things I never thought I would see in the Alien universe, a mid like French like Louis the 14th era French costume party was not one of them, and then it all gets torn up in the most glorious of ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the difference between fiction and reality. Like, in fiction we can just enjoy these things as the entertainment and commentary that they are, without actually getting into the ugly nature of the real world, what death and violence actually mean.
Yeah. But yeah. And and so this is probably a good time also to, before I was going to use that as a transition to go back and talking about some of our human and synth characters, but I want to stay on the track of talking about the creatures. So let's also talk about like a couple of the creatures that we do see apart from the xenomorph, starting with the two that we actually see what they do. And there's I don't know what they're officially called, but the ticks from that seem to suck out all your blood, to an insane degree. And like, I have always been freaked out by the concept of like, bugs that like drop like, behind your shirt lapel or something that you don't see. Like, that's a trope from anything from like, the Mummy to the X-Files movie had it, and even freaking Spider-Man, although at least that turns out pretty good for Peter Parker. But and then this was just like, oh god. It was so disgusting, and I'm like, this is why I'm never stepping foot on any kind of futuristic alien, or not alien ship, but just spaceship. Because I don't ever want to be in any situation like this. And that was disgusting, but the cake is taken by the freaking, octopus eyeball thing.
which apparently they actually gave it an official scientific name. It is called Trypanohynica ocellus, also known as T. ocellus, or as they colloquially call it on the podcast, the eye midge, which again, aptly named. thing. Although I, from the moment I saw it with its little like squid-like tentacles, I'm basically like, so it's an eye-ripping octopus. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, this thing, like the ticks are gross and the ticks are dangerous. Anyone who has had dogs and has had to pick a tick that has unfortunately been feeding off of the dogs and it's all bloated, and you look at it and you're like, you think, when you say like nature is beautiful, nature is also this. Nature can be can be gross at times. And then you crush it and you send it and you flush it. But this thing, the eye octopus, I joked earlier, but I actually think I mean it. Maybe it's just because we've had 7 movies with the alien, and we're used to how it works, and obviously it's still horrific, its life cycle and its deadly ferocity. But the moment I laid eyes on this thing, I was like, I would take an encounter with a xenomorph 100 times out of 100 before I let that fucking thing anywhere near.
Well, yeah, it's a question of how do you want to go? Because I feel like death by, well, it depends on what the xenomorph's going to do with you. Because if it's death by xenomorph, like I think that can be fairly quick, unless it's going to use you, to like, place you in front of an egg or turn you into an egg or, or whatever. Like that can be a long drawn out process, which is absolutely horrifying. But if it's just going to be like one of those things where it's going to, stab you in the face with its, with its inner mouth, that can like be horrific, absolutely horrific, but it's probably going to be quick. This eye thing, like you're conceivably still alive as it's burrowing your eye from its socket, and you're going to be aware of the process until it takes over your motor functions. And like that, oh god, it's just so sickening and disgusting and terrifying. Yeah, I don't know. Like, and it's funny because on that first viewing, I didn't really know what was going on with the cat that we see initially. Yeah. I just thought it was like, at first watching it, I thought like that cat's been through a lot. And it's not until like the thing comes out of the cat that you see what's actually going on. This time I was watching it and you just watch the cat come out and you see the eye and you're like, oh fuck. And then, we've already talked a little bit about the sheep later on, but that is just like, I don't think I'm going to be able to get that image of the sheep just staring at me out of my mind.
Yeah. No, the freaking, like it was one of the more violent and disgusting scenes in any scene of the franchise. That the fact that they do not spare any expense when they show this Teocellus creature physically ripping the eyeball, like optic nerve and all, from this sheep's eye while it's bleeding and terrified and still alive, and then as it settles itself into its eye socket and all those little 7 eyes like condense into one, and then just starts looking at you, and you're just like, this is, I found myself thinking about like Ripley's classic line from Aliens, like, I say we take off and nuke the entire spectrum orbit. It's the only way to be sure that this thing dies immediately.
And let me just say, like, and the fact that, again, this fucking guy, the fact that Boy Cavalier kneels down and he's like,
yeah,
I'm like, I think I want that to be how Boy Cavalier goes now.
Yeah.
That seems like a great setup.
Yeah, it's like if you're taking bets on who's going to get Boy Cavalier on the end, you probably still have to have the Xenomorph as like the favorite because this is still Alien. But then you probably have the Image, and then maybe some of the our more human characters like Wendy and or Kirsch or as the or or any of these other characters. But yeah, the Image would definitely probably be the most fitting because yeah, because it almost seemed like he was jealous that the thing was looking at Kirk. He's like, no, I'm the boss. Look at me. And it's like, okay, I will look at you. And then I would have been like, I would have just said nothing. If it wants to look somewhere else, let it look.
Yeah. But what really, here's the thing that really disturbs me is the fact that, like, with how freaky it is, and it's still one of the early reveals of monsters. We still have two more that we have not yet seen exactly what it is they do. And so I'm like, why are you holding off on that?
Yeah.
What the fuck do you have in store?
No, I mean we've actually barely even seen one of the creatures. I think they call it the fly. I think it's been locked up. They're like, good, keep that one away. But the orchid, the other like the big plant like one, that was a scene like when they walk into the ship and they see it like hanging there, and Kirsch is looking and he's like, kind of plant, and you're just every alarm bell. You're like, don't stand so close to that. You don't know what it is. And then when he like walks on, he's like basically like you used to one of them. I think it was Toodles. Like, use your stand guard, and you're just like, okay, so you're dead. But then then it wasn't. And you're like, why are you waiting?
Then because it starts to open up, and he's just looking at it. It's like, okay, I know you're a kid, so you're stupid, but for the love of God, and then it's what's her name? Oh God, which one is Curly? Who says, come here, we need your help with something, and he's like, oh, and and walked away from it. It's like, dude, Curly probably just saved your life.
Yeah, one of the reasons I was actually so shocked that happened is I don't know if you've noticed of the 6 actors who play the synthetic characters, 5 of the actors are credited in the main cast, and then there is one, Kit Young, who plays Toodles, who is a guest star. And he was the one who was looking at that plant thing, and I'm like, I know why he's a guest star now. And then he survived, and he's still around. But I still have a feeling that, unfortunately, if any of the kid characters, these synthetic characters, are going to die, I do think it's going to be him, because he is the one who seems to be the most, again, enthusiastic about the scientific potential and everything, and I think that's going to make him careless. And unfortunately, again, I don't want to get into too much of the trailer spot spoilers, but there is a shot from a trailer where all the synthetics are in a cage, like kind of waiting for somebody, Boy Cavalier, and he isn't there. The other 5 are. So I'm like, uh-oh.
Well, we'll see. Oh yes, and he's the one who actually picked his own name, Isaac.
Yeah, so. No, he is definitely given off the classic, you're next up kind of vibes.
That's interesting. I didn't necessarily pick, I mean, I was sure he was going to get it at that point, but yeah, I don't know. I do know that the closer we get to the end of the season, the more I expect the body count to start to pile up. But yeah, we shall see. Speaking of like body count, and we're gonna see a whole lot of people die next week because we're gonna be seeing the story of the Maginot, but a character that we actually already see get it in the early sequence of the first episode. Her name is Zavary, who played by I think her name is, again, I'm probably going to butcher this, Richa or Rika Morjani. She stuck out because she's a very pretty lady. But she actually felt like she was going to be a bigger character. So when she got it so early on, I was like, oh, that's a shame. But now it makes sense since we're going to go back and see actually the story of the crew. So it looks like we'll be getting more of all of their characters. But when we already know that they all die. So yeah, that'll be next week is going to be particularly bloody. I'll be interested to see how much of that story we get, because it's already been discussed that like a bunch of people died just to get the creatures. And so, yeah, as you would expect. But I'm interested to see how much of like a mythology dump we get also with next week's episode. But yeah. So anyway, have that to look forward to. But going back to On Board the Maginot during the course of events of the episodes we were watching, do you want to go ahead and talk about, we talked about the dinner party scene and the fact that, we're following Joe, throughout the ship, and and of course Wendy is looking for him. That's why she's there. And then we get that reunion moment between the two of them. And by the way, I do have to say, like, before things get dark for slightly, I really do love his whole shtick of like not being able to keep a secret, which of course is ironic because that's all he's going to be doing over the last couple episodes. But just the fact that he first he tells all the other hybrids that she has a brother, and then when they actually find Joe, and he's like, he starts to blab, and she's like, "Don't you dare!" And he's like, "Dude, that's your sister." It's just like, it's so hilarious, but also it's like you just feel that it's really traumatizing in that moment for Joe, because he's like, "I'm sorry, what?" And he's almost not even able to process that information in the moment. And I don't think he can even accept it until even after they're talking about what happened. It's really not until he starts questioning her about very specific things in their childhood. And then when, she's answered enough of those to his satisfaction, then he just immediately grabs hold of her, and in a hug, and it's just this emotional moment where this member of his family that he thought was lost forever, and he has lost his entire family, and the fact that she's right there, and it's such a shock that he wasn't anticipating. It's a really affecting moment, and I love the way the two actors play that moment.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best acted moments in the entire show from both Sidney Chandler and Alex Lawther. because you really do, you can feel like just the raw charged emotion on both sides. You can feel like the eagerness, even though she initially isn't going to tell him until later, presumably, like the eagerness and the happiness that's just palpable, radiating off of Wendy when she finally encounters Joe, and like just the way that she like almost can't stop herself from looking at him, and then she's basically like, please come with us, like so we can keep you safe. And he clearly like recognizes there's something familiar about her, but obviously how would he put two and two together? Because one of the things that they acknowledge is the fact that he went to her funeral. They like, it's implied essentially and later confirmed that, after Wendy's synthetic, Marcy transferred her into Wendy's synthetic body, they took Marcy's lifeless body, zipped it up in a bag, sent it back to his family, including Joe, and they buried her. And that was a traumatic experience because he was having to say goodbye to his baby sister who he thought had died. But then he had essentially processed that, where he thought he had, and he was trying to go forward and make like a better life for himself. Like that kind of heartbreaking scene where we see him try to get out of his contract because he's, wants to honor his promise to his father to go to medical school, and the company's like, nope, tough out of luck. And he almost has that human breakthrough moment where when Wendy takes over the machine and he's like, do this or face my fury, and it's like face your fury what? And he's like, what did you just and it's because Wendy is subconsciously altering the machine as she's reaching for him. But then just the way that when he finally gets those answers, as you've mentioned, and he just like almost collapses into her and like just holds her, and just the look on her face when she's having that, it's like anyone who has siblings like that is a moment that I really think like I was getting a little teared up watching that. It's beautiful, and that and their relationship throughout, after they're reunited is also incredibly sweet. We can back up to the conflict later, but when he comes to her after his surgery, and she after she's been damaged and like rebooted, and like just the way that she's like almost immediately reaches for him, and he calls her biscuit, and then when she takes him back to her room, and she's almost like trying to like tidy up a little bit, and then they're like, and they're watching Ice Age Continental Drift together, and he just looks at her and he puts his arm around her and she leans into him, and you're like, this is so sweet. Never let anything happen to these characters. But there is obviously the unspoken kind of darkness there, where the looming prospect of the fact that Marcy did in some sense die, and Wendy is, even though if she has all of Marcy's memories and is her in many respects, she is also something more. And then there's the kind of the thread that Boy Cavalier is trying to pull on, the idea that basically because Joe understandably still has doubts. And Boy Cavalier is trying to play on that when he basically he tells her like, I couldn't come to see you because they wouldn't let me, and I was on the other side of the world and with my army regiment. And she understands that, but then Boy Cavalier is like, oh, if I were your brother, nothing would have kept me away. And you're like, that's such a line of bullshit, but he's doing it.
First of all, no, you would not. Second of all, like one of the things that I despise the most in that sequence, and like he refers to Joe in this manner throughout, but especially in that sequence, he keeps referring to him as the brother, not your brother. Mm-hmm. It's just, he is the worst. And I don't think I hate him more at any point than in that scene.
Yeah.
Because he's so manipulative in that scene.
Yeah. And like the concept of him being like, she's like please let him stay. He's nice. A very childlike response. Like, he's nice if you like brothers, which I don't. or fathers or mothers. And you're like, this is where you get into the fact that like he's so obsessed with Peter Pan. And when we think of Peter Pan, we think of the happy-go-lucky Disney movie, and we're like, oh, but then if you actually go back to the original source material of the book Peter Pan, and you realize, oh, there is some dark ass stuff in there. And when he's like doing his little like audible reading session, audio book of the Peter Pan, and he's of course reading the most ominous chapters about the Neverland and how dark and threatening it looks at night, and you're just like, oh yeah, this is why they call it Peter Pan syndrome, the boy who refused to grow up. And his cruelty is also very boyish in a way. Like the fact, like one of the moments that actually like really I had a visceral reaction to was when he's telling her, your brother can stay if he works for us, and if you do what I tell you, and she's like, I will, pinky promise. And then he responds to that by grabbing her finger like with his full fist, and you're like, that is the type of thing that like a 10-year-old boy would do to a little girl. And it's clear he hasn't evolved beyond that emotionally.
Oh God. Yeah. And the fact that he's like, okay, he's super ominous, and then he, tries to act all light and cheerful and nice, but he's not.
No, he's not.
God. Yeah. And then, an equally dark relationship, which we've touched on a little bit, is between Slightly and Morrow. Which again just haunted me so much just because of, the very manipulative and invasive nature of the relationship. And it just, things like, you want to be my friend, don't you? And, all that. And, and then when it gets to the point where he's actually threatening Slightly's family, even to the point that he's actually there, with Slightly's mother and threatening her. And, that conversation we had, said, you do anything to protect your parents. This is that. Do we understand each other? And it's just the fact that this very happy-go-lucky kid, is now having to endure this, this trauma of this, this adult taking advantage of him and threatening the people that he loves, and having to keep everything a secret because he's constantly, being listened in on. And it's just, it's so horrific. And I'm actually wondering what we're going to get on the character of Morrow this week, and how they might turn some of this stuff on its head to where, oftentimes shows will do this, where we have a different understanding of a character who's doing some very bad things. But as it stands right now, I really hope he meets a gruesome fate at the end of all this, because he is, as I said before, in many respects, I find him more terrifying than any of the so-called monsters. I think he's the real monster.
Yeah. Well, if you'll notice, the season finale is actually titled "The Real Monster," which I have a feeling we know who the monsters they're referring to there. But in particular, the character of Morrow, he's fascinating because, again, he's a unique being that we've seen in the Alien universe as a cyborg, and you have to ask yourself, what kind of person would willingly undergo that process? What person, or was it willing? Was he coerced? Because we do see he does drop us some hint about his past. The fact that he did have a daughter who it is implied is now gone, and the fact of the matter is that he took this 65-year mission on a mission that would take him away from her for that long, and he knew that when coming back that he would, everyone he ever knew and loved would be gone. And when he has that phone conversation with Yutani, where at first he thinks it's her grandmother, because that was the Yutani who was in charge of the company when he left, and now he basically is like, he's telling her the fact that he doesn't have anybody, and she's basically like, well, you should have read your contract. And he basically says, I'm not complaining. I'm telling you this so you know how far I'm prepared to go to do what I have to do. Those specimens are my life's work, and I will get them back. And it basically paints a picture of a man who essentially sacrificed everything for the sake of this one mission that maybe wasn't worthy of that sacrifice, but it's all he has left. So he is going to see it through and cling to it, at the expense of anything else, including his own humanity. And it's because he understands that bond, that connection between a parent and their child, because he's experienced that he is willing to use that to break and coerce slightly, and that is the type of thing of, again, people who were abused or traumatized, not having empathy for people who were in that situation, but instead using that experience and knowledge to abuse and traumatize others. That is how the cycle perpetuates.
Yeah. And, I'd call, I'd call the character a monster and talk about wanting to see him meet at Grisly Fates. I mean, both of those things, which I stand by, but also I think that there's so much behind the character that like is so much perhaps more complicated than that, and which is why I'm very interested to get, to see what we get next week. About the character and why, he feels he has to make certain decisions on board the ship. And I think what makes the character so horrifying for me is because he's someone who is still in possession of humanity, and he's choosing to make these decisions. Nonetheless, this is, that he still has the worst parts, of being a man, and it's just, so it's like, this is not Ash, who is devoid of humanity and is doing these things because he's, because he has orders and he feels no compunction about doing it. This is someone who is in full possession of humanity, has orders, and is going to obey them and see this mission through regardless of the cost to his own humanity. And which makes him 1,000 times more horrifying. But also an extremely interesting character. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what kind of end I want for the character, even though, like, just based on what he's doing to Slightly, I'm like, yeah, you need to meet a horrible fate. But then if the show has something more interesting in mind for him, then I'm open to seeing what that is. But he's not doing good things.
No, he is not.
Yeah.
But I want to praise the actor who plays Moro, Babou Ceesay. He is, I think, he may be giving, in my opinion, the strongest performance on the show so far. And they're all great. But just everything he's doing with his character and just the intensity behind his eyes and with the way he calibrates every action, it's just awesome. And I thought I had never seen him in anything before. It turns out he actually was in, he had a very small role in Rogue One, a Star Wars story. He has Lieutenant Cephala, which when I saw that, I was like, oh, yeah, he was. But obviously this is a much bigger, showcase for his talents.
Also, I want to I want to talk a little bit about the fact that obviously, just, his look, the fact that, I don't want to simplify things just because he's, African American on board, in a Nostromo light ship. But sort of the general look and stuff, it does bring to mind Yaphet Kotto from the original Alien film. And the reason I want to mention that is because I think that speaks a lot to the general character design work with the costumes and makeup and all that stuff. I was watching this and there were so many times where I'm like, that is straight out of the 70s and looks perfectly at home with the original film. And it's something that it's why I was so looking forward to calling back to the original film. It's why I loved what Alien Romulus did, because it adhered to the technology of the original films and sort of costume design and all that stuff. And this show is doing it perhaps even more, where there's so much that feels like it's plucked from the time in which the original film was made. And I just love again, so many my mind goes to the hairstyles again, just because that's such a distinctive 70s thing is is the hair. And obviously the opening sequence on board the Maginot was so evocative of the original film, but I think throughout the show you can see so many sort of callbacks in the way characters are styled and their costumes and stuff like that. And I just think that the people involved with the show on the technical side just did such an outstanding job of making this feel like it's part of that world and set in that time, and yet pushing things forward. And so I just want to tip my cap to everybody involved in all that work, because this show really does feel like it's set in that world, but giving us a viewpoint on things and places we just didn't get to see, in those original films.
No, I mean, the production design and costume design and visual effects work all, coming together to evoke the world of the original Alien film is top notch. And some of that, but as you said, it does push the boundaries forward, and that's always a delicate balance, because you don't want to just do exactly the same thing. But you want it to be consistent with the world, like the fact that these ships have this kind of this 70s era, computer looking technology. This is 2 years before the original Alien, they would still have that. And so but then you find the opportunities to push and show new things, and we get a lot of that on Earth. One of the more evocative images, I think, is the image of Morrow when he's hooking the little cables up to his temples to transfer the ship's data into his memory banks. And just, it's the constant flashing lights as he's the way he looks, just kind of dark and sweaty and menacing in that sequence. I'm that looks like something that definitely could have just come out of the original 1979 Alien, but it also looks modern and fresh. So I think that, there are too many craftsmen to name them all, but I would just say that I really love all their work. You had mentioned the cost in that scene with where the alien attacks the party. The costume designer talked about on the podcast how they basically designed the costumes in mind so that it would, we knew that the characters were going to end up being ripped open and everything. So they designed the costumes like that. So the way that the dresses and the suits that they were wearing were unfolded when they are torn to shreds, it looks like it's accentuating the violence that the alien has wreaked upon them. And I'm that's just, awesome, thematic things that they're working on. And then actually one of my little, and the Neverland compound is obviously very, it's new, it's high tech, it's, on this beautiful island. It's something that we haven't really seen. But one of my favorite little design and character choices or thematic choices that they're making is one that we see that this compound, and then we see that there are these like strange looking, technicians walking around in hazmat suits, constantly spraying something on the walls, implying there's like some kind of mold or infestation. And I'm like, metaphor. Metaphor for what's going on here.
God. Yeah. Something else that was brought to mind when I was watching earlier. It's not necessarily connected to what we're talking about right now, but I just want to make sure I don't forget to mention it. I was definitely caught by the fact that we have 5 alien creatures and 5 corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Not an accident, I think.
No.
Yeah, so that's obviously, hinting at the parallel of, 5 different kinds of parasites. Yeah, but and then following up on, we're talking about the technical aspects. It seems like a good point for me to go ahead and bring up the score for this show, which is composed by Jeff Russo, who very often works with Noah Hawley. And he's also worked on other projects, like he's very often used on many Star Trek projects over at Paramount. I really have enjoyed his work on Noah Hawley projects, like his score for Legion. I don't think it's necessarily like the most memorable score where I'm going to sort of listen to certain themes, but I think that it's an extraordinarily interesting score that is also terrifying and in a way thought-provoking, in a way that it needs to be to sort of match what's on screen. So like I say, it's very much like Legion in that regard, where I felt that was sort of the same way, where you can't, like, you almost can't divorce the images from the music that's on display. So I think it's a really excellent score. Just not necessarily something that I'll be like listening to on repeat, on my music player. But on rewatching, I started to pick up certain things, like especially Wendy's theme and things like that. But mostly just how really freaky the music is, and it's got a lot of callbacks to like classic Alien. And then of course, like the way it goes in a different direction is we've got like sort of very aggressive contemporary music for the end credit sequences.
I was actually wanting to ask you about that, because I know you're not always a fan of that choice in these.
I was not super thrilled about it at first, but rewatching the show today, I was like, no, I'm vibing with it. It's the show's own stamp on things, and I think it fits well. It's just, it was a little jarring at first because that's not typically what we get from the Alien franchise. But I think it sort of works, and and it doesn't like pull me out of it, like it does with some other things. Like I'm still like, I never was and I never will be on board with the musical choices they made for the end credits on the Willow sequel series. Like that was no, didn't like that. But this here, I think it works good.
Yeah, I mean, I liked some. I liked a lot of those songs they used in the Willow series. I actually have several of them, like the Renaissance in Iowa cover of Black of Enter the Sandman. I listened to that a lot, but I agree that it was jarring the first time I heard it. This here I found it much less so. Like I actually think that this is like obviously like the other Alien movies used a more traditional score, but it's not like the sweeping orchestral score for something like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, where it felt like using contemporary music was completely out of place. This case, I'm like, what? Because they don't just use it at the end credits; they also have it in the show itself, like the Killer Crane by TV on the radio, which is playing when Wendy is up on the cliff, looking at the ocean, and then the song that she's listening to when she's like dancing around in her room, like watching her brother on the screen. So I think that ending the first episode with the Mob Rules by Black Sabbath, I was kind of like, I was so into it already, and then I'm like, you know what, that actually fits. That fits for this show. So I was curious to get your perspective on that, but I'm glad to hear that it's working better for you.
Yeah, I think it's because the reason why it works for me is because like Noah Hawley's shows have a vibe that's all their own. So it's like, so it doesn't necessarily have to adhere strictly to like the traditional Alien formula, a more classical style. And even like, it's, and even, the Alien franchise has kind of challenged that a bit because it's classical in nature, but it's also like music that's meant to like terrify you and and stuff. And, and the later films in the franchise have even brought in a more electronic edge to it at times. Alien Romulus has a lot that's very classical, but also a lot that's more driven by like synthetic music, like synthetic instruments, and and things like that. So yeah, the franchise is constantly kind of it's at its root it's classical, but I think they have done some things to sort of challenge that at times. And and this is a whole different thing where you're actually throwing in like contemporary rock music and stuff like that, but I think the show has its own identity so that it actually fits. So yeah, I'm on board with it.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm yeah, it's funny. I say it's not something I'll listen to on like repeat, for the soundtrack, but I actually have listened to some tracks from the soundtrack, and like, it is just thoroughly like creepy and frightening as an Alien score should be. So, so I think it's been successful in that regard. Just perhaps I was a really big fan of the score from Alien Romulus. Even ordering the soundtrack for that. So I think I'm a bit more fond of that score, but we'll see if the themes of the show grow on me. But even if they don't, like I said, I think it's an extremely effective score in doing what it's supposed to do. So, which by the way, and you haven't watched Legion, right?
I watched the first season. I didn't finish the show.
Okay. I was going to say, because the music for that show is also very unique. And that's a show that also has some different kinds of contemporary music and stuff that's like out in left field. And there's in particular a sequence in season 1 that is like, it's on like a different plane, and it's like it's black and white with like silent film intertitles, and and it's this really wacky, crazy music, and that like, that's the sequence where I'll never forget the music. So like, I hope you do go back to the show and finish it at some point, because it's out of this world. But yeah, Noah Hawley knows what he wants with his music, and it's always very effective. But okay, good. I talked about the score. I've done my due diligence there. Okay, let me see what else I want to make sure that we cover talking about the show. Well, I can leap off my talk about the hairstyles and mention Curly, who, funny enough, has curly hair. And because her hairstyle reminded me sort of the most of Ripley in the original Alien film. And so we can talk about her and the fact that she challenges Boy to try and, she wants to take her place as the favorite. She's going to find that a bit of a challenge because I think Boy is pretty settled on the fact that Wendy is his favorite, and he seems to have that inclination confirmed. The episode after Curly tries to convince him otherwise, but yeah, it's there. I'm interested to see what she's going to do, because I have this feeling that, like, there are times when I feel like she's pretty on board with everybody. She's, she's, playing as a member of the team of the Lost Boys, but she definitely seems to be trying to challenge Wendy's position. I do wonder if that's going to lead to, lead to not great things for her, but let's face it, there's going to be a whole lot of people who die in this show, so it wouldn't exactly be a huge shock. But I don't know, what do you see in store for her, and what do you make of her trying to take her place as number one?
I think it's, it was an interesting angle to give one of the hybrids that kind of perspective, because, as, Wendy being the first, there's that great scene in the first episode where she meets all the other little kids who are going to become the hybrids. And she kind of is being their big sister, talking to them, reassuring them, setting their minds at ease. And in that scene, the girl who will become Curly is the one in the wheelchair, and her question is asking, will I be able to walk again? And when Wendy says, you'll be able to walk, run, dance, all those things. She just has the biggest, most innocent smile on her face. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. But then since she has become the synthetic Curly, the hybrid Curly, I do think that she, as I mentioned, she is kind of one of the ones who basically seems to be inclined to leave her childhood behind. There's that dynamic in that scene where basically when all the other synthetic kids, other than Wendy, before they go on the mission, are sitting together and they're talking about like what it was like when they were sick and how they feel different now. And Curly talks about the fact that she was one of those kids who was basically always sick right up until the moment she got really sick. And I think it kind of, that maybe informs her perspective that now that she's been given this new body that's strong and can't get sick, she's basically like, that was my old life. I'm done with this. I'm new now. I'm better. And that is what her desire to prove herself kind of stems from.
Yeah, I was going to say that exactly. I think she feels like a character with something to prove. She's like, I'm not weak anymore. I'm going to, like, I want to stand out. I want to do big things. Um, and so, yeah, and I think that's just amplified by the fact that, um, her state beforehand, the fact that she was the one in a wheelchair, and she's like, I'm not that anymore. I'm going to, um, prove that I'm, that I can stand out, and that I'll be the one to make a big impression. I just worry that she's, you know, that she's going to try to rise too high and perhaps pay a price for that. Not through any fault. It's good that she wants to, sort of transcend her own life, but I, there always is that worry about someone, with a bit too much pride.
Yeah. And as when you said, like, how do you think it's going to go? My working theory, such as it is the idea that at some point, perhaps because of her brother, perhaps because of this new connection she's forming to the alien creature, we're going to see Wendy kind of split off from, the Boy Cavalier and the Neverland, crew. There are some shots of them like out in the jungle with the soldiers from Hermit's unit, and I do wonder if maybe they like escape somehow, maybe with the alien or because of the alien. And I could see, Boy Cavalier being very angry about that, and Curly stepping into the boys like, "See, I told you she was trouble. It should have been me all along. I will go get her for you, or I will get her back." And that's kind of the role I could see her stepping into. Even though it's interesting that like she had that moment in episode 3, and then in episode 4, I thought she was going to be a bigger part of it. And then she was sitting there with them all, when they were doing their like computer chip ice cream flavor test and joking around. So it's like she's not a complete like hard edged manipulative character now. Like still has that childlike element to her. But I do think that if any of the hybrid kids are going to break bad, it will be her.
Well, I'm more worried in the immediate future about Slightly in that regard.
Well, I mean,
the
thing about Slightly is that I think he will do something terrible, but I also think that he is still a fundamentally good character, and I think he is going to be racked with guilt over it.
Yeah, I'm feeling conflicted because he's about to like do something that's like partially born out of jealousy.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, but it's also, but again, it's completely understandable because, he's, had his, as I've said before, he's had his innocence violated. So like, in a way, like, and he's being forced to do this thing that this, you can view it as sort of a way of him taking back control in a way by like, fixating on this person. Like, I'm jealous of the fact that you are here when my family isn't. If my family was here, they'd be safe and I wouldn't be having to go through all this. So I'm going to do something within my power, which is to take it out on you. And unfortunately that's very like understandable, especially, considering that he is a child. And so, yeah, I'm really worried for him and what he's going to do. And yeah, so let's talk about sort of what happened at the end of these episodes, because we haven't really talked about it that much. You just mentioned Wendy perhaps going on the run with the alien and maybe her brother and the old soldiers, but I worry about any organic life forms that are on that road trip. But the show ends with, they're doing the experimenting with like, and I freaking loved like Hirsch dissecting the face hugger and actually taking out the embryo.
Yeah.
Which, like, we've never seen that before, right?
Yeah. No, we haven't. We haven't. No.
Yeah. That thrilled me. I was like, oh my God, this is like new. And, and using Joe's old lung,
Yeah.
which they have replaced, to experiment. And at first, with the end of episode 3, I didn't know what they were doing. I thought they were implanting it like in him.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck. So I'm glad to see that they weren't exactly doing that, but the 4th episode ends with, the alien baby, growing up and breaking out of the lung and the glass cage, and then staring Wendy in the face and her petting it.
Yeah.
And it's like, mommy. and that's on the heel of all this that's like been developing, where she can hear the xenomorphs, and whether they're talking to her or whether they're talking to each other and she's overhearing it, is unclear. But what is clear is that there's a connection between her and the little baby alien at the end of this episode, and I have no fucking clue where that goes.
Yeah.
But that's a hell of an ending for an episode.
It is.
Yeah. So I don't know what happens. Is she, take the alien and try to escape? And what spurs that on, if that is something that happens, or does like part of her sort of development of the, as you've alluded to, of deciding what she wants to be, is that connected to the xenomorph, and what does that mean? And and like I'm just like, I don't have a clue where this goes, but I'm so excited to find out. And again, the frustration of thinking we might not get any inkling of that this week if we're doing a total flashback episode. But yeah, I don't know. Where does your mind go?
Yeah. I goes in a lot of different places. I do think that, because like, she knows how dangerous these creatures are. One of the scenes that we haven't talked about that maybe we can touch on it near the end is the fight that she has with the
oh God, that's so good.
To save her brother. And it's like, and the fact that she single-handedly takes on this creature and wins is a testament, like, even though she gets very badly injured, is a testament, like, she knows how dangerous it is. But she also is very alone, and she's having these, like, again, she loves her brother's there with her, but her brother also has these doubts about whether or not how much she really is her sister, and she has made this promise to Boy Cavalier to continue to work on hearing what the alien says, to communicate with it so that he can stay. But I think that she is a little bit, hurt by the idea that, like, people are looking at her differently, and I think she empathizes with this alien creature that has been, like, essentially experimented on and put in a tube. And because when she wakes up and she tells them, like, what she was hearing, she said, she talks about hearing the sound, and she says, they were hurting it, and they were like the embryo, and she's like, the baby. And that was a moment where I was like, oh, okay, so she is actually, for lack of a better term, seeing, if not the humanity in this alien creature, but the fact that it is a living creature that was scared, that was in pain, that didn't know where it was, that was being tortured effectively. And that is the kind of thing that if you're a good person and you like recognize that, you're like, well, then make it stop. And then when she sees, and when she's talking to the alien, using her vocal modulators to mimic the sounds, and when the creature, starts to respond to her, you see her smile and she touches it, and it's not like and it seems very honest. It's not like oh, I'm doing this. This is so exciting. This is going to help forward our project. It's basically just like, oh, like it's a little baby and it thinks and it needs comfort. And yes, it clearly thinks that this is its mother. And we have seen in the Alien franchise a couple of instances where the alien creature is birthed from a human and thinks it's its mother. In some cases, that turns out really badly. And in some cases, it actually, like, again, the scene from Resurrection where the alien hybrid creature rejects its biological alien mother because it thinks Ripley is its mother. And Ripley takes advantage of that and blows it out the airlock. But in this case, I actually think that she's going to feel protective of it. And
the thing that's working in her favor is that the xenomorphs seem to treat to not be interested in feeding or anything on synthetics. So I don't think this is going to turn out for her like poor Isabel Marced in Alien Romulus.
Yeah.
All
right. Yeah, and I think that whether or not she tries to, whether she goes on the run or anything with it, I do think that at some point, because Boy Cavalier and the group here thinks of these things as property, as things to be experimented on, at some point they're going to try to do something to this creature that she's going to think is wrong, and that's when I think there's going to be pushback. And I do wonder, again, I'm also being leading on to the fact that the finale of the season is called The Real Monsters, with the implication being that the real monsters are the corporations and the humans who are trying to do this. As Ripley had said, Burke, I don't know which species is worse. You don't see them fucking each other over for a percentage. So that's been in the DNA of the series for a long time. And I do wonder if for instance, again, I don't know how this series is going to end, if it's going to have multiple seasons or not. But, we know that the aliens are on Earth, and they are clearly not by the time of the original Alien, hence why Weyland Yutani would be so desperate to get their hands on one. So at some point in the series, all these aliens or at least the classic xenomorph is going to not be on Earth anymore. And that either means that they all die, or maybe Wendy finds a way to try to get it off Earth somehow. And maybe she goes with it or something like that. That I could see happening, something along those lines.
Yeah, it's funny you just mentioned, you don't know how many seasons this show would, and I think we mentioned something about its run earlier, but I don't see anything yet about I guess it's still up in the air about whether this is going to be a multi-season show or not. We'll have to wait and see. It's one of those things that is often griped about. Kind of like to know if this is intended to be a one season thing or not as we get closer to the ending. So I know what kind of ending to anticipate. But it's the way things go. Yeah, I know there was one poster for the show that shows the image of her inside the alien's head, and I don't know if that's supposed to be just artistic or symbolic, or if there's something more literal going on there. I don't know. We'll see how things unfold and what what Wendy ultimately decides to become.
Yeah.
But yeah. God. But yeah, I'm so excited for to see how all this unfolds. It's just, yeah, I am really enjoying this so much, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all ties into the original film, and yeah, and that just makes me really excited now that we have this sort of on the ground, not quite from her viewpoint, but like, when we've seen Yutani, and I think we're going to be getting more of her in the episodes to come. So I'm very interested in that, and it's just sort of wild that this is the first time we've actually gotten to see the character of Yutani, because we've gotten so much on the Wayland side of things in the other films, and so it just feels like there's so much that we're seeing for the first time in this show that just feels wild. That it's like getting a peek behind the curtain of like the things that you never thought you'd get to see. And now it's like, here it is.
Exactly.
But yeah, and you said earlier you were guessing that Peter Whalen's long gone by this point. Yeah, because even if we factor in like Prometheus and all that, that would have him like dying, of course, in the events of Prometheus, which is much longer before the original film than this is. So so even if that is quote unquote canon, to this, he would be dead already. So but yeah. Other speculation. Okay, what do you think Kirsch is going to, what is he doing?
I think you haven't watched the TV show Hannibal, but what Hannibal Lecter in that series, played by the great Mads Mikkelsen, is an incredible performance. One of the things that he does is he watches characters who he thinks have the interesting potential for violence, and he kind of nudges them, psychologically, or manipulates them into situations because, as he says, I was curious what would happen. And I kind of think that's Kirsch's vibe. I think Kirsch, kind of viewing himself as detached from all of this, will be loyal to the company that he is programmed to be loyal to up to a point. But I think with these experiments, we've seen a number of these scenes where he's watching these scenes of horrific violence, and his response is to kind of tilt his head in a robot way and be like, fascinating. and I think maybe like David before him, he's going to be like, what, this particular, I think he might do something that, shall we say, is a little bit unethical, just because, and have one of these, if there is a person who gets infected, let's say, with one of these creatures, not because he did it, but because they just find themselves. I think other characters might be like, well, we have to stop him. He might be like, wait, let's just see. and again, because he's curious what will happen. That's Kirsch's vibe, I think.
Yeah, the fact that he knows exactly what's going on with Slightly, and he's not telling anybody. And the whole scene where he talks to Slightly, and with the monkeys on the wall, the see no evil, hear no evil,
speak no evil.
Speak no evil. Yeah. And you get the impression, like, is he trying to impart something on the Slightly, or is he actually trying to figure out for himself what he's going to do? Yeah.
Little of column A, little of column B, I think. because I do think ultimately at the core of Kersh's character is the thing that I've mentioned a couple of times, which is I think that he believes that synthetics are superior to humans, and that if he has a goal, it's to essentially prove that point. Basically, and a victory for him would essentially be if Wendy and the other hybrids stop listening to their more human, instincts and start acting more like machines, more like him, more like making decisions that are a little bit more either cold and rational or at least a little bit more detached and dispassionate.
Yeah. And then I love the fact that he's just watching Wendy at the end. And again, it's like, let's see what's going to happen. Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, I am like, I don't know what it is. I really do love androids, or not androids, synthetics in the Alien franchise doing diabolical things. I mean,
which to be fair is most of them, with the exception of maybe Bishop and Andy, and even Andy has some dark moments. but yeah, like you've got David, who basically has a god complex. You have Ash, who is just again like ruthlessly committed to the mission and the company. And Rook, and and actually Call's okay. Call's okay in Alien Research, but yeah, most of them are kind of dark.
I think the thing about David is that like the other people in his films are not necessarily the sharpest tools in the shed. So like I kind of enjoy him being the most intelligent person in the room, and like it's like you probably should have seen this coming, y'all. But and let's just face it, Michael Fassbender is just so goddamn charismatic that like he can do no true evil in my eyes. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any particular hopes for other characters as the season goes on?
I mean, the number one thing that I am invested in, as I think I had mentioned earlier, is I just want Wendy and Joe to be okay. I just want their like brother-sister bond to stay intact, even if Wendy does start to go on a journey where she, is evolving beyond humanity, both and maybe even finding more in league with this not in league, but like more in common with the alien creature. I do think the character of Joe and the connection that we've seen between them is her essential link to her humanity. And I think if she loses that will represent a very dark turn for the show, which this franchise is not afraid to go dark, obviously. But everything I've seen so far tells me and at least gives me the hope that like these two characters love each other. These two characters want to protect each other. And I do think that, at the end that will, even if like Wendy, ultimately decides, well, then like what Prodigy has got to come down and all these other characters, need to pay for what they've done. I do think that she will not lump Joe in with that. She will basically see him as someone who he is, her brother, who is good, a good person and who loves her. And I could be wrong, but I don't get the sense that this is a cynical show like that. I get the sense that this is a show that has its eyes open about the nature of humanity, but I do think that this is not a show where it is basically going to end with basically like, you know what, actually all of humanity maybe sucks and deserves to die. That I don't think that's Noah Hawley's philosophy. If you've seen his other works, Fargo has a character, like that show, and based on that movie, a lot of dark, incredibly bleak stuff happens in the Fargo, but there's always a character like the Marge Gunderson or the Molly Solverson of the world in those shows who is just fundamentally good, a good person who goes through the darkness and manages to get through it, and actually by the end is maybe a little shaken by what they've seen, but has not been broken by it. And I do think that that is kind of the philosophy that Noah Hawley will stick to for this show, because I do think whatever journey Wendy goes on, you know, with her humanity, I don't think she will lose it entirely.
Well, and that also, though, factors into how long this show goes for, because Noah Hawley is also unafraid to go into those really dark places before he brings it back around to hope and humanity. So even if we eventually end up in that place, the show could go, cross some very dark territory in the meantime. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see, but yeah, fingers crossed that the two of them are make it through at least relatively okay. And like, my other big thing is I know I'm not gonna get I wish here. I know that her story is going to continue to be tragic, but I really want good things for Nibs. I want her to, do better than she's currently doing, which I don't think is in the cards.
No, I think she's gonna see some more shit. Like there's a shot of her in the trailer that we haven't gotten yet, where she's looking like wide-eyed and almost psychotic, and there's blood splattered on her face, and I'm like, oh, Nick. you sweet girl, yeah. You're gonna go through some shit, aren't you? One of the things I hope does not, like, one of the reasons that revelation about her being pregnant, or saying that she's pregnant, freaked me out so badly was, again, like, even though, again, I don't know if they can get infected because of they're synthetic, and my mind immediately went to the dark place of like, oh no, is she going to get like infected with an alien parasite, and she's going to be pregnant with it, and she's going to be happy because she thinks this proves her point, and then it's going to come out of her. I'm like, please don't let that happen.
I don't know what, like, the freaking creepy ass eye monsters can do to the synthetics, because it certainly still seems completely interested in, in jumping into the eye socket of whatever it finds, be they synthetic or human. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, oh god, like I feel like just even broaching the topic of her, even being imaginary pregnant is like, it's like putting a loaded gun on the table. Someone's gonna fire. So yeah, we'll see. Yeah, and I don't know. Otherwise, like, my hopes for the rest of the season are just like, yeah, I like you. I want Wendy and Joe to be okay. Eventually, I want hold on. I want Kirsch to go on being duplicitous. Well, he hasn't technically been entirely duplicitous yet. He's just been keeping some things to himself. But I want him to continue to be sarcastic and fun and entertaining. And I want Boy Cavalier to die a horrible death.
Yeah. See, we merge those two, where Boy Cavalier meets some gruesome fate at the hands of one of these creatures that he's unlocked, and Hirsch is there watching as it happens, and Boy Cavalier is basically like, "Help me!" and Kirsch is like, "No."
I love that we both did the same thing. Oh god, yeah, and yeah, and I don't think the Sylvias are making it out alive.
No, I like I said, I think Arthur could go basically, if not next week, if it's a full flashback episode, but by the next episode, I think he's toast. And I do think Dame Sylvia is probably gonna die. Like poor sweet Lady Crane did on Game of Thrones after she was so kind to Arya. She still got caught in the end.
God, the two franchises in which the majority of people are gonna die. Oh God. But yeah. And anything else, I'm just like, I hope to be terrified, thrilled, and just entertained as this series so often does for me. I want it to, like, this is easier in this case because I don't really know what's coming, but I'm looking forward to, and I don't always need this, but like I am looking forward to just being like surprised and sort of shocked and appalled by, by certain twists and turns that the story takes. And I always say that, like, that's not a necessity, because I always point out the difference between predictability and inevitability. Because I think just because you can see something coming in a story does not mean it's a failure on the part of the storytelling. I think that just depends on what you're trying to do. But in the case of this show, I don't know what the F's going to happen. So, so I'm quite enjoying that. But yeah, and I'm just excited about the pure artistry and and thrill of the story. It's what I love about the Alien franchise, is just like, and it's the thing that for the, obviously, better than anyone, you and Trish, that I've gotten more into being like seeing stuff that will scare me and being more of a horror movie fan in certain respects. But for a long time, Alien was the lone exception. And for some ungodly reason, this franchise has always made me delight at being terrified and on the edge of my seat. And so I'm looking forward to spending another 4 weeks, doing just that and being scared. Yeah, it's I freaking love this world so much. So,
as do I. One name that I did want to shout out before we start wrapping up is the actor, the performer who plays the alien himself, Cameron Brown, because there is actually a physical person in the alien costume, and he's doing a lot of the physicality for the xenomorph. The head and the jaws are animatronics and they're puppeteered, but like all the, like, anytime you see the alien like racing or jumping or attacking, like, that is a real person who's doing the physicality, Cameron Brown. And he was on that Alien Earth podcast, and he talked, for instance, about the scene in the second episode where the alien like leaps off that high balcony and goes through the glass, and he made that jump in that costume, which is crazy impressive. And that just kind of speaks to, again, one of the things that the show has done really well, and in the spirit of honoring the Alien franchise, is like we haven't gotten it's not wall-to-wall action. I think next week might have a lot of that, but the set pieces that we have gotten have been really well staged. Like Hermit trying to escape from the creature in the stairwell was really, visceral and scary and intense. I already mentioned, we mentioned the fight scene with the party, and then Wendy again Wendy and Joe fighting the xenomorph, and the xenomorph.
And she takes what is that thing that she takes, and she hooks it by the inner mouth.
It's a meat hook, and she uses it to hook the actual xenomorph by its tongue and is dragging it along. And you're like, holy shit! And then the alien bites off its own, bitey tongue to grab her, and then we don't get to see her actually kill it, but the fact that we saw her pack that katana, and the next time we see her, she has cut the alien's head off, and you're like, oh, she's not a little girl anymore. She can do that.
Did I hear right? Does she have a warrior mode? Is that what she?
I mean, if not in practice, not in theory, then at least in practice, it seems like she can flip that switch.
Yeah, because that was just so bad. Even though we didn't actually get to see, the killing blow, it's so badass. Yeah, I loved that. Yeah, that sequence was amazing and thrilling, and especially because this was the first time that I watched all the episodes back to back. Yeah. So by the time we got to that point early on in the third episode, I was just on the edge of my seat. It was just so many. And which, by the way, it should be said, these episodes this is one long movie, It really doesn't necessarily feel separate episodes of television. Which I kind of love, then that it's just one big, extended ride. But yeah, no, that sequence was incredible. I just, and again, it's so much of it is just the performer, the alien performer, and these movies, the franchise has always been at its best, in my opinion, when they actually do a real life physical xenomorph as opposed to relying completely on CGI. So yeah, I thought that was great. Yeah, that's just trying to think of some other things as we wrap up. We talked about her, but I'm looking forward to seeing more of Yutani in the next episodes. And yeah, I think that's about it. I'm sure there's stuff we didn't touch on, but there's a lot that happens in these 4 episodes.
Yeah, we don't need to visit any more specifics unless something pops into your mind. But I do want to just end.
Sorry, go ahead and say what you were going to say.
No, I was just going to talk about Sydney Chandler a little bit.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, because it feels like we've talked a lot about Wendy and her character, but I feel like we haven't really taken a moment just to talk about just how out of this world incredible Sydney Chandler is in the show. Her performance drives the series, and it's a really tall order to create this character who is a young child in the body of an adult, and then all this stuff that and you have to sort of convey how she's processing all that, and a lot of times it's without speaking. It's just the way she's looking at other characters and looking at the camera, looking at the alien. And I just think she's been incredible. And I think that she is quickly over the course of these episodes, honestly, even just over the course of the first episode, established herself as one of the sort of monumental characters of this franchise. And like I said, differentiating herself a lot from the likes of Ripley and Sigourney Weaver's performance, but definitely on that level of just an amazing protagonist facing off against all these monsters, alien or otherwise.
Yeah. No, I mean, she, like, as I think we had talked about with the Alien, Romulus and the other Alien movies we discussed, a staple, an essential staple of these movies is they always have a strong female lead character. And Wendy is unlike any of the other characters we've seen as the leads because she is, this hybrid character, which makes her different. And she is also as a child. But man, the performance, like, it lives up there with the best of them. Like Sydney Chandler, she's a relatively young actress. People will know that she is the daughter of a great actor, Kyle Chandler, who many people will know from his amazing work on shows like Friday Night Lights. He's also had a lot of great movie roles, like he's in Carol, although he's not very nice in that movie.
Can I just digress for a second, because I was just reminded of it when I was looking up his credits a couple weeks ago, was the fact that the thing that I specifically know Kyle Chandler from, because it was on when I was younger, it was a network television show called Early Edition.
Yes.
Where he got a newspaper that from like the next day. And so he tried to go out and help people because he knew what was going to happen. And the show didn't run for very long, but I remember it making such an impression on me, in part largely because of his performance in it. And so, like, a lot of people know him from Friday Night Lights and a lot of later stuff, but I've always loved him, remembering that show. So yeah, quite a legacy, and the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, apparently.
No, I mean, for me, like, he's always Coach Taylor. Sometimes have to physically remember myself. No, he's not Coach Taylor. He is the actor Kyle Chandler. But in particular, as you said, like, so Sydney Chandler, like, she's only had like 4 or 5 credits at this point. I don't think she got into acting until, at least screen acting, until, she was a little bit older. And clearly this is a case of, like, she is incredibly talented. This is not like a Nepo baby situation. Like, she is a really, expressive and empathetic and intuitive performer. And she has some of, I think, the most, like, expressive, like, eye acting that I've seen in a show in some of these episodes, because she is, you can tell at the way that she's engaging with the world, she's processing everything, and she is, but she is doing it through the mind of a child as an adult woman playing this character, which is a really tall order. And the way she modulates her physicality in certain scenes, like I think of the scene when she's sitting in the in her room surrounded by all her stuffed animals, watching her brother on the screen, and she's sitting like childlike holding the little stuffed animal, and it's a very it's a pose that reminds you who she is inside. And then you also see her, again, wrestling the literal xenomorph with a meat hook through its tongue and dragging it and then cutting its head off with a katana. And you're like, oh, yeah. So she looks believable doing that, too. So she can do both. And yeah, I think that we're very lucky to have an actor this talented in this incredibly challenging role. And I can't wait to see where she takes the character.
Yeah, I have a couple things that I want to say just based off of the things you were saying. First of all, I hate the whole Nepo baby thing. I don't really subscribe to it. I think, whenever I've ever heard of someone with a family legacy of actors who has, landed a big role or been successful with very few exceptions, it's because they're extraordinarily talented and they've proved themselves. And so I hate that whole thing. I think it's dumb. The other thing I want to mention is we mentioned the katana sword a couple times. It just makes me laugh because I have a big Highlander fan. I have a dragon head katana sword in my closet. I've had it since I was a little kid, or at least early teenager. And so it just cracks me up because if all of a sudden I found myself heading out on some dangerous mission, I would probably be also grabbing that and slipping it over my shoulder. And then the other thing, like, just on the subject of, like, her performance as, a young kid who's, getting acclimated to, like, having an adult body. It just really cracked me up just because, I've been going through my own journey as, non-binary, and to be honest, wondering how much further that goes, and, very much, thinking about myself through going on a trans journey. And so just her moments of like, these are weird. It just struck a chord for me. I'm just like wondering my own experience if I woke up one day and I had a different body than I was used to, how I would respond to that. So I found that humorous on a number of levels. And yeah, so I love her performance in this so much. I think she's incredible, and I just really like, and it's the only thing that I'm sort of bummed out about this week, because it looks like if we get the whole episode telling the story of the Maginot, that means that we won't get to see her in this episode. So yeah, we'll see how that turns out, because who knows? Maybe it's a flashback episode and we get both stories. But if it's an episode that's totally taking place on the Maginot, I won't complain, because that sounds like it would be amazing. But we'll have to wait and see. I just want more of all these characters. So yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's it for me. I freaking love the show. I'm enjoying the hell out of it, and looking forward to the rest of the season.
So am I.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and start to wrap up. For the most part, we didn't. I think I saw a number pop up at one point. It's just been us tonight in the live stream. I think that's because a lot of people perhaps haven't started watching the show yet. It's still a new series. So it happens, but if anybody's coming to watch this later on, please, like the video and subscribe to the channel, of course, and we'll be definitely talking about the rest of the season in a number of weeks. It'd be after I get back from my trip, to the convention with our good friend Trish. Gonna have a blast doing that. And aside from that, next week we're going to be talking about Batman Forever. Week after that, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Then, as I mentioned, we'll be off the week after that. Then we'll come back to discuss the final 4 episodes of this show, Alien Earth. And then the week after that, we'll be finally talking about James Gunn's Superman, which, I'm very excited about. And oh my God, freaking Warner Brothers is making it really hard for me not to buy that damn digital copy, because they've already lowered the price down to $20. And, from what it was previously, which was $30. And it's like, you fuckers, you really want to go ahead and buy that digital copy. But, I'm spending a lot on that Steelbook that's coming out at the end of next month. So I think I'm going to try to still hold on strong. But I've got other stuff to look forward to throughout the month of September. So I should be fine. But anything you want to mention before we sign off?
No, just I think we talked about it all. Looking forward to everything we've got coming up in the next few weeks, and very excited to see how Alien Earth wraps up. And yeah, it's I enjoyed this break from thinking about my football teams.
Yeah, I'm. It's fine. I too am looking forward to seeing how the show wraps up, but I'm not looking forward to it wrapping up.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine if the next 4 weeks pass by slowly, so that we can just soak it all in.
Yeah, I do hope that even if this show, like, it's not, I'm not putting much stock in like the linear ratings because, as you said, it's only airing once on FX and people don't watch linear TV anymore. I hope it's doing well on the streaming numbers, but whether or not it gets a second season, I do hope that this season at least has an element of closure to it, so that it feels like it could stand on its own. And then if we get more, we get more. That just because if this show ends on a cliffhanger, I'm gonna be really pissed off.
I don't know. The only thing that would make me nervous about it is the fact that it is an expensive show.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm like, in the annals of like Noah Hawley shows, as bizarre as any alien story is, like, it's still not as freaky weird as Legion. And
Yeah.
Legion managed to get 3 seasons. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm hopeful. Like, but you know what? Worst comes to worst, it's still like the season is an incredibly fun ride. So we'll see where the chips land. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, see you all next week for a crazy discussion on Batman Forever. I can't wait for that. It's going to be so much fun. And yeah, in the meantime, go scream in space. No one will hear you.
And enjoy the rest of your Labor Day weekend.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.